Good morning, everybody. Good morning, the panelists. Good morning, the Honorable Vice Chancellor and the Pro Vice Chancellor. Good morning, Iti ma'am. So, ma'am, we are good to go and we have good participation also. Sir, with your due permission, can we start it?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Over to the anchors.
The far-reaching prospects of technology and opportunities offered by it has brought about significant changes in not just academic disciplines, but also in our outlooks now equipped with a digital lens. A very blissful morning and cordial felicitations to Honorable Vice Chancellor AUMP, Lieutenant General V.K. Sharma, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor Professor Dr. M.P. Kaushik, Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor Professor Dr. Anil Vashisht, Registrar Mr. Rajesh Jain, all the deans, directors, HOIs, HODs, members of faculty, research scholars, and students. I, Marisha Singh Sengar, extend to you a warm welcome to the International E-Conference on Digital Humanities, Emerging Trends and Future Prospects, organized by Amity Institute of Social Sciences and Amity School of Communication in collaboration with her team. As human civilizations progressed and reformed, the prospects of digital humanities came into play, which got further reverberated with the use of modern equipment into a digitized model for the present world. The age of digitization has hailed ever since the dynamics and scope of human relationships, language, philosophy, and cultural interactions have gained ground and united humans around the world. It is therefore imperative for academicians and social scientists to explore the field further, and the conference provides an apt platform for the same. Before we begin with this much awaited intellectual exchange, I request everyone to invoke the blessings of Ma Saraswati by joining hands. Saraswati Mahabhage Vidya Kamallochane Vidya Rupe Vishalakshi Vidyam Dehi Namostate. The event couldn't have been possible without the exemplary leadership of Honorable Vice Chancellor AUMP, Lieutenant General V.K. Sharma, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, and his pivotal role in research initiatives in the university. Now, I take the privilege of introducing you to our perennial beacon, the illuminating fountainhead of visionary ideas, Lieutenant General V.K. Sharma. General V.K. Sharma joined the prestigious National Defense Academy and passed out as Permanent Commissioned Army Officer from the Indian Military Academy on 31st March 1972. He was granted the President's Commission in the Corps of Signals of the Indian Army, served the Indian Army for almost 40 years, and retired from the second highest rank of Lieutenant General, which is a 3-star and a flag rank of the Army. During his meritorious service, he held several command and staff appointments and participated in Operation Rakshak and Operation Vijay in the Kargil War. He also served for almost 7 years in the Jammu and Kashmir Valley in Srinagar in the ranks of captain, colonel, and brigadier. General Sharma has also been an excellent academician in addition to being a military leader. He has had the unique distinction of standing first in BE, ME, and MMS programs. He has also been an instructor at Institute of Armament Technology, Girinagar, Pune, which has now been redesignated as Defense Institute of Armament Technology. He has also been the Commandant of Military College of Telecommunication Engineering, located at Mau, Madhya Pradesh, for a period of 3 years. During service in the Army, he has traveled to almost every nook and corner of the country and has also headed military delegations to France, Germany, and the USA. For his meritorious service to the nation, he was awarded the Ati Vishisht Seva Medal by the Honorable President of India on 26 January 2011. He has also held the appointment of Colonel Commandant of the Corps of Signal for a period of almost 4 years. Lieutenant General V.K. Sharma is the founder Vice Chancellor of Amity University, Madhya Pradesh, Gwalior. Under his able leadership, Amity University, Madhya Pradesh has grown by leaps and bounds and has been adjudged the best private university in Madhya Pradesh by CMAI in May 2014, and thereafter for consecutive 3 years from 2017 to 2019. In the NIRF rankings announced in April 2020, Amity University Madhya Pradesh is amongst the only 2 private universities of Madhya Pradesh to have been ranked, thus making it one of the best private universities of Madhya Pradesh as per NIRF. He has also been instrumental in introducing a host of best practices aimed at fostering academic excellence in the university. May I request you, sir, for your opening remarks? Please, sir.
Very good morning to all the panelists and the attendees. Dr. Sharmishta Roy from the Department of History, Queens College, City University of New York, USA. Dr. Bilkisu Maijma from Nasarawa State University, Kafi, Nasarawa State from Nigeria. Professor Dr. M.P. Kaushik, Dr. Sumit Narula, Dr. Itirai Chaudhary, all the panelists who are here, and all the participants who have joined this webinar, which is apt in today's digital era. Digitization was thought earlier about data as applicable only to computer sciences. It was expanded to include the banks, money transactions, financial dealings. It was then expanded to include the engineering departments like mechanical engineering, civil engineering, architecture, buildings, structures, electronics, networks, disaster management, e-governance, and now, of course, the humanities, which was considered something totally out of the digital context so far, has also been included. It was about 7 to 8 years back when a student of mechanical engineering got up and asked me, "Sir, I hate computers. That is why I did not join CSE. I took up mechanical engineering because I like machines. I like to work with things which are physically present, not in the cyberspace. But still I'm forced to learn computers. Why?" My answer to him at that time was, you just cannot stay without computers, today's world. Computation, the data which is being generated from every source which is visible in the world, everything which is there, including the Internet of Things and Internet of Everything now, is being generated whether you like it or not. And if you are not going to utilize that data, you will be left around. So therefore, even as a mechanical engineering student, you need to utilize computers and you need to develop taste for them. And there's no option without that. You may not like computers, but the computers will not leave you. Now, when it comes to humanities, it was thought that history and computers, social sciences, social work, what have these got to do with computers? But wrong. There is so much of data being there in history. There is so much of data in social sciences, so much of data in mass communication, liberal arts, paintings. There's so much of data which is there, which needs to be captured. It needs to be collated. It needs to be structured. And it needs to be utilized for research. Just to quote an example, when the third battle of Panipat was happening, which are the other battles which were going around simultaneously at that time? Or what was the state of the world or state of Asia at that time? What were the contemporaries doing? That can be got only if there is data available. Studying a thing in peacetime or in piecemeal does not make much sense. So we need to generate data and utilize that data for humanities, which has been now well recognized all over the world, and hence the term digital humanities in the 21st century, emerging trends and future perspectives is an ideal subject which anybody who is studying humanities and anybody who is studying social sciences must know about this. There are a number of tools for researchers, research scholars, which can be utilized for collation of data, for structuring of data, for utilizing of data, data mining, data analytics. All this to carry forward their research and to save the time which they would have otherwise taken by doing physical survey. Trying to reinvent the wheel of no use. The data about the, especially in archaeological data which is there, is available on the internet today, which needs to be utilized as to what was happening when, for example, when the Indus Valley civilization was taking place here in India, Pakistan, that area which is now. What civilizations were going on in Egypt? What was happening at that time in Europe? What was happening at that time in Americas? So all those things, or in Africa for that matter. So the data could be now captured, could be collated, and we could know what exactly was happening at that time, what progress was happening, and we could probably correlate and make research work more meaningful and easier. There are a number of softwares which are available as a matter of tools which are available for research, and the large virtual reality, even during the lockdown, the virtual reality, through virtual reality, you could see the various paintings, you could see various museums which are there, you could see the various structures, you could see monuments, you could read their history, you could read the 7 wonders or 8 wonders which are there, which have been earlier, which have been removed, which has been not removed, why something has been included, why something has not been included, all those things. The internet provides you so much of resources. To say that humanities got nothing to do with knowledge of net or knowledge of digitization would be grossly wrong, and not only wrong, will be lagging behind in our research if we do not utilize the digital humanities aspect of technology. The tools like Digital Research Tools Directory, which is called DIRT, is available, and which provides you the directory of all the tools which are there, and some of them are free and some of them are paid, of course. There are tools for which enable you to do fast, rapid reading. Whatever is written, it is spoken out by the computer through various softwares, so that you don't have to waste your time in reading. You just listen and you will accumulate knowledge in your mind. All those things exist today, and it is proper for our youth today to understand the virtual reality and the amount of knowledge and data which is available, and Wikipedia and some of the other functions, they enable you to keep updating the data, to keep amending and editing the records which are available, and to make the resources more meaningful so that we can graduate to the next level through digital humanities. So therefore, my dear students, those who are learning humanity, and then it's an interdisciplinary thing. It is not only humanities. Computer science is very much involved. The data analysts is involved. Information technology is involved. And last but not the least, human mind is involved. And where human mind is involved, sky is the limit. I would not say even sky is the limit, it is beyond sky. So therefore, let us keep our minds open at all times, and let us be receptive to technology. It is technology which differentiates us from the animal world. It is our power to think, our power to exploit the resources, particularly in the digital era, which will see us through and make that we progress in humanities as much as we progress in science and technology. Most of the research papers that are written today in most universities, there is undue emphasis being paid to science and technology alone. The other day, during one of our meetings, I was asked that you have got 5 centers of excellencies, all dealing with mostly science and technology. Why don't you have a center of excellence for humanities? Why don't you have a center of excellence for social sciences? Why don't you have a center of excellence for painting, sculpture, and culture? So all these things are very important because as human beings, we deal with emotions, which all of us carry, and emotions are best portrayed through humanities. The word humanities comes from humans. So therefore, the importance of this webinar is well registered by all of us and well understood. And we've got excellent speakers who would be talking, who are much more knowledgeable on the subject and who would be giving their views. And the students are lucky to be listening to them. I would like to thank the organizers, particularly Dr. Iti Rai Chaudhary and Dr. Sumit Narula, who have made this international e-conference possible and brought us with the dignified and most knowledgeable speakers today. So I wish this e-conference all the very best. Thank you very much and Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inspiring words. It is always a matter of great privilege and joy for us to listen to your motivating ideas. Our exposure to these ideas would surely assimilate in us the highest of virtues that one needs to ingrain in oneself. Thank you once again, sir, for your benign presence. This intellectual platform has also been dignified by the benign presence of our most revered keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Sharmishtha Roy Chaudhary. Professor Dr. Sharmishtha Roy Chaudhary is a digital humanities practitioner, historian, and writer with 2 decades experience in academia. She received her PhD in modern French history from Northwestern University, USA. Dr. Roy Chaudhary has a master's degree in modern Indian history from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and a Bachelor of Arts History Honours from Lady Shri Ram College for Women, Delhi. Her fields of activity include digital history, online pedagogy, asynchronous, synchronous, and hybrid modalities, international pedagogical collaboration, hybrid teaching, designing, developing of online courses on multiple platforms. Currently, Dr. Roy Chaudhary teaches in the Department of History, Queen's College, City University of New York. She has supervised many undergraduate digital humanities projects on world history. She has presented her research at Harvard University 2019, Digital Humanities Initiative, City University of New York 2020, and Connecticut Digital Humanities Conference 2021, and various other conferences. She was a 2021 Collaborative Online International Learning, COIL, Faculty Fellow. She is the author of the book, The First World War, Anti-Colonialism and Imperial Authority in British India, 1914 to 24, published by Routledge in 2019, and also of The Communist Cookbook, a novel which was published by Penguin Random House in 2013. Her current projects in progress include a work on the politics of history in interwar France and a historical novel set in India in the 1940s. I am supremely privileged and honored to have the pleasant task of welcoming you, ma'am. May I invite you to kindly deliver your keynote address. Please, ma'am.
Good evening. Greetings from the greater New York City area. I am Sharmishtha Roy Chaudhary. I teach in the history department at Queen's College in the City University of New York. And I want to begin my address first by thanking Professor Iti Roy Chaudhary, Dr. Sumit Narula, Dr. Deepti Bhargav, Professor Ziba Siddiqui, and other distinguished members of the faculty and administration at Amity University, Gwalior, for organizing this international conference on digital humanities in the 21st century, emerging trends and future prospects. I thank Chief Patron, Dr. Aseem Chauhan, Chancellor, Chairperson, Lieutenant General V.K. Sharma, Vice Chancellor, Co-Chairperson, Dr. M.P. Kaushik, Pro-Vice Chancellor of Amity University, Gwalior, for their encouragement and support of digital humanities at the university. I'm looking forward to learning more about several digital humanities topics and the work of scholars, researchers, and practitioners in the field, and I am truly honored and I thank you for the privilege of delivering this keynote address for this conference. Mine is a historian's approach, but literature is my starting point for this talk. From literature, I will then address the history of digital culture and the significance of the developments in technology and in historical production at this time. So I am going to start with an image and some words from Prometheus Unbound. Now, in Prometheus Unbound, which is a long lyrical drama in 4 acts by Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet traced the struggle between a power-hungry Jupiter and Prometheus, the Titan, who was condemned by Zeus to eternal torment for revealing the power of fire to humanity. Chained to his rock, Prometheus addresses the mountains. And he says, "Ye mountains, whose many-voiced echoes through the mist of cataracts flung the thunder of that spell." To which the mountains reply, "Thrice 300,000 years o'er the earthquake's couch we stood, oft as men convulsed with fears, we trembled in our multitude." It was not for the poem's overall meaning that I was drawn to the words many-voiced echoes, but by the imagery that the words conveyed of nature and its forces. The poets of the Romantic Age, like Shelley, were adept at conjuring imagery of the unfathomable power of nature and its forces. The image of multiple voices echoing down the immovable mountainsides of time also nudges us to ask questions of our own terrain, the terrain of digital humanities. Questions like, where are these many voices coming from? The answer, of course, is from many places, from big, well-funded institutions, all the way down to the lone enthusiast curating his or her own collection of images and texts. Where do these voices go? And the answer again is everywhere. Everywhere where the data is made available, and nowhere at all if the infrastructure is lacking. What is their goal or quest or purpose? Is it individual drive? Is it professional advancement? Is it institutional patronage? There are, of course, many other questions as well. Whose voices are the loudest? Whose are the faintest? And foundationally, what is this new terrain? Every day we hear these multiple echoes ricocheting across the digital realm, forcing us to re-examine online personae and subjectivities, the assumptions of content creators and consumers, their autonomy, their motives, etc. Many-voiced echoes thus also represents the state of digital humanities today. Much like the echoes through the mountains, our reconstitutive struggle as scholars and practitioners in the brave new world and new landscapes of digital humanities are several. We must address them from our disciplinary perches, even as we reach out for interdisciplinary solutions. As a historian in digital humanities, I will illustrate this by focusing on the tension between the production of history and its circulation. tensions that the digital age has thrown into relief and for which we have no easy answers yet. I'm not a technologist or even a historian of technology, so I will not be talking about the minutiae of programming or coding, but all of us here are aware of the impossibility of our work as digital humanists without the power of computing. Keeping in mind the history of digital technology, the larger question that I pose to all of us, historians and non-historians, is what are the histories of production, of consumption and connectivity that made possible the digital culture we currently practice? By raising these issues, I hope to draw our attention to some of the themes of the conference, themes such as the digital technology and the practices of humanities research, digital archives, digital labor, and digital infrastructure, among many others. So let me start with a brief history of the technologies of communication and production that led up to our era of digital everything. I will then talk about how the digital turn has affected the production and circulation of historical knowledge. And finally, I will talk about interdisciplinarity, collaboration, pedagogy, and infrastructure as well. So I'm going to proceed now to a slightly potted history really of technology and information, and then I will open it up into a discussion about history in the digital age, or the production of history in the digital age. Now, digital culture is, again, in a very sort of a shorthand, is a sort of a history of technology plus culture. And of course, we can go into a lot of detail about, the definitions of culture. But I'll just point out here very briefly that humans have been recording information for a very long time, from clay tablets, the abacus. The purpose was really to store information. From there, we've had other ways of storing information, manuscripts, even the first sort of books that were very expensive, very difficult to produce, and were therefore very precious. And from, this point, we find ourselves now in a position where information and the production of information has skyrocketed. As Jonathan Spira writes in his book Overload, more information has been produced in the last 25 years than in the last 5 centuries. So very briefly, there is a data deluge. And how did we get here? Now, data production or information production is, of course, related to episodic and periodic expansions of human activity. The earliest interregional link for goods and people was probably the Silk Route. Besides goods and people, it also spread ideas and religions. I mean, this is also, of course, how Buddhism spread from India to Southeast Asia to East Asia and so on. And then the Mongol Empire, in the 11th and 12th centuries and 13th centuries, integrated the Eurasian hemisphere even further. Now, I'm going to go very quickly over the next slide, because I just wanted this to be an overview really about, how technology and technological change has also affected the production of knowledge, and has brought us to this point of digitalization of knowledge and of information. In a sort of, if we look at it in a chronological way, the second industrial revolution of the late 19th century is in some ways important to understand, because from 1875 to 1914, the pace of change in industrial production accelerated. And this second industrial revolution, as it's sometimes called, was quicker and deeper in its impact than the first phase of industrialization. For one thing, it was a far more deeply scientific revolution than the first industrial revolution had been, although one can overstate the extent to which science and technology were separated previous to this. But certainly in this phase, we find that science was applied to industry much more purposefully. So we see this particularly in electricity and in chemical industries and so on, both of which depended quite directly on scientific discovery, and both of which were foundational to the computing history of the 20th century. You needed to have electricity in order to be able to transmit information in the digital age, and you needed to have, certain sort of production of certainly in the 20th century of polymers and plastics that would make all of this possible, and of course silicon, which we're all familiar with now. Now, I know this is very brief, and again, as I'm saying, as I said, this is just a survey to put into context our digital age. The First World War and the Second World War created further acceleration of these trends, of conflicts, but also of industrial production. They were both total wars that demanded enormous amounts of industrial mobilization, and also of information, and therefore of technologies of knowledge gathering and processing. So the digital culture that we live with today, its early history was really in the history of connectivity. That is the early history of the internet. And this, of course, proceeded on parallel tracks with the history of production of hardware and software, and also the history, very importantly, of cataloging and retrieval. When we look at the Mandaneum of Paul Otlet or the Memex of Vannevar Bush, these were early attempts to try and organize information in a way that it could be retrieved quickly and easily. Now, eventually, all of these technologies and these developments would converge, they would interloop, they would create entirely new possibilities for commercial and technological developments, and programming itself changed as computers became connected during the Cold War. So in the very early years, you had DARPA and ARPANET in the United States, which were early exercises in the history of the internet. And then, of course, you had the packets revolution, where information was sort of, broken up into chunks and then reconstructed at the end by receiving computers. And this also allowed, faster transmission of data, not just within countries, but also potentially across national boundaries. So at first, these connected networks were small, but a series of global agreements created the network that we now use. And 3 billion people now use the internet for various activities. Now, all of this, went along also. If we look at the sort of the conventional narrative of this, there's a certain triumphalist tone to the digital turn. That this is the unfolding of ever increasing technological progress. But it's important to remember that even within this, there are histories that still need to be honored and that need to be acknowledged. There are those who are forgotten in the development of this story. Women, for example, and minorities, and sticking to examples from the United States, where the history of technology in the post-war period took on triumphalist tones, probably very stridently. There are, we have to acknowledge the gendered and racial implications for the development of this technology, both within government and academic circles. Now, in the post-Second World War period, this technology allowed a small minority amongst the minority middle class to develop at a time when the private sector was very deeply racist. So you had African Americans who would work in, government jobs, because the government jobs were a way into the middle class in a manner that was not really possible in the private sector, which was quite fairly racist and explicitly racist at this time. Not that government jobs were not. I mean, if any of you have seen Hidden Figures or read about it, you'll come across names like Dorothy Vaughan, Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, who worked in extremely segregated conditions in the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which was the precursor to NASA. When West Area Computers Unit ended in 1958, then the transition began to NASA. Now, women's history in computing is overlooked, but African American women's history within this is especially erased. And it's important to understand that even such, technologically pioneering organizations, absolutely crucial to the development of the internet and to digital culture like NASA, satellite, the launching of satellites and so on. Even these pioneering organizations started as both race and gender segregated in the workplace. There were segregated restrooms, and women were often just not invited to meetings. So having given you this sort of context, I'll now turn to certain questions about digital humanities and the digital age. So looking at digital humanities from the perspective of historians, a number of questions come to mind. And one is, what happens to history research when digitization increases access? Then, where are the sites of production in the digital age? Where is history produced? Where is it circulated? Another question that comes to mind is, what are the implications when images become abundantly available, as abundantly and as easy to produce as text or words? And finally, what I will talk about is sort of collaboration and, interdisciplinarity, pedagogy, and digital infrastructures, all of which are very relevant and important to all of us, historians, people working in literature, in media. All of us are invested in these questions. So on my next slide, I have some statistics, or some, not really, I have some numbers, and I'll talk about it, but I'll talk about it also in terms of, what is the implications of this. And, when I wrote my dissertation in French history over 2 decades ago, the production of knowledge was rooted in a scarcity of both resources and access. Now, I know I am not alone in this situation. All of us who work on subjects that require either travel or access to obscure sort of sites or, hard to find documents and repositories, we know this journey very well. As an historian of modern Europe and modern India, the lack of access to sources, to material, meant constant anxiety about the viability of projects. Would I find sources? Would I be able to gather resources to travel? As a researcher from the global south, would I get a visa for countries like France and the UK? Where would I live when I reach there? For how long would I be able to manage? The logistics of research in an economy of scarcity is maddening, as so many of us know well. Now, on this slide, I have sort of presented, some examples of resources that are available now after digitization. So in the National Archives of the United States, there are about 12.5 billion pages of records, of which about 500 million are digitized. And on its own sort of strategic plan, NARA writes that big data, that is social media and public use and reuse of government data, are changing the nature of government records in ways that challenge traditional records management practices. In India, the National Archives contains about 2.5 million records that have been digitized. The National Digital Library of India has about 81 million records, or rather resources. And I'm a big fan of the National Digital Library of India, because when I was researching for my book, I actually signed up to be a beta user when it first launched. So I acknowledge them in my book as well. I really benefited from that experience. Then another collection, which I'm also very thankful for, is the digitized collection of the Bibliothèque Nationale in France, in Paris, Gallica. And that has about 8 million plus documents. Now, more generally, there are 129 million titles of, published books, of which apparently Google has digitized approximately 40 million. I'm not going to go into that right now, because there are all sorts of, issues that Google also has regarding copyright and so on. There were issues with digitizing books as well. But all of this is to show you that the availability of material for historians has exploded, and yet this is only a fraction of what is available. Just to give you an example, I mean, the National Archives of the United States only retains about 5% of what it, of the material that comes its way as, worthy of being archived and cataloged. And within this, the digitized portion represents only about 4% of that. So there's a staggering amount of material, even though digitized materials is still a fraction of the materials that are available, or that are potentially available to historians. And yet, this sort of, despite this unprecedented abundance, I mean, it would be impossible for a single individual to go through, 500 million pages of records individually. And despite this sort of, explosion of material, what is interesting is that the pace of historical research did not at first feel revolutionized. And here I'm going to draw on the work of Lara Putnam, who wrote a very important article in 2016 called The Transnational and the Text Searchable. And in this article, Putnam talks about the move to web-based research in history. And she points out that the move to this, the digitized search, it felt like more of the same that we had always done, just quicker. And I'm just going to quote from her article. Precisely because web-enabled digital search simply accelerates the kinds of information gathering that historians were already doing, its integration into our practice has felt smooth rather than revolutionary. And indeed, for many of us who trained as academic historians, both in the pre-digital world and then in the post-digital, or in the digital world, the digital turn did feel less revolutionary. It felt more, about convenience rather than about revolution, because it felt that we were, just extending what we were already doing. Now, what the digital turn did was that although we were seeking out just more of the information that we thought we already had, in fact, the digital search and the digitization of archives expanded the realm of what could be studied by historians. So in the analog world, in the world in which we had to physically go to archives, that's a world we've almost forgotten after 2 years of pandemic. But in the analog world of historical research, we as historians were restricted by, where we could go. maybe we could go to 2 countries if we were doing something, if we were working on world history. Maybe within a country, we could go to 6 or 7. And maybe if we were enormously lucky and landed a huge grant that would allow us to travel to multiple countries, we maybe have consulted, 20 to 30 archives. But at each of these places, we would have to then further organize our lives, our ability to live in these various places for lengths of time. What Laura Putnam pointed out in her article was that text searchable material, really put an end to some of this. Now, on the one hand, this is an excellent development. It means that the resource scarcity of the past is no longer a shadow that looms over us or a nightmare that looms over us. Material in the pre-digital research era was either nestled in very inaccessible places. Especially for researchers from the global south, we found it harder to travel to places. And of course, what it did was it also meant that, sometimes materials were just unavailable. So you just didn't read them. Or sometimes they were both inaccessible and unavailable. Now, digital search, therefore, did transform historical research in the sense it made our materials available to us in enormous numbers. But it also separated from our research something that was supposed to be intrinsic to our research, and that is context. Putnam brings this out very well in her writing. How the text searchable, by reducing the distance between archives. If you were doing world history, which is what I do, if part of my work lay in the archives in London, and I also wanted to consult archives in India, and maybe archives stemming from the Middle East, well, I would have to go to all 3 places, all 3 locations. Now, what digitization did was that it allowed me to pull documents from multiple digital repositories, whether it was the British Library, whether it was the Qatar Digital Library, whether it was the National Archives in India. Now, of course, I have visited, the National Archives in India and the, Teen Murti. I visited the Town Hall Library in Kolkata, the Municipal Archives in Kolkata, the various other archives in Delhi, as well as the British Library in London. I have visited them physically as well, so I have a sense of what each of these places contains. But But digital search meant that anyone, anywhere can pull these documents, from these archives and get them in an instant. Now, what separated the digital search method from the pre-digital search approach was context, and Putnam emphasizes this in her article. But for historians, of course, context matters a lot because it informs our analysis on any topic that is situated in the past. But to Putnam's argument, I'm also going to add temporality. Digital search has also removed us from a sense of temporality. To those of us who remember that pre-digital world, and there are many of us who do, because we have researched in both settings, to those of us who remember that pre-digital world, it was not possible for us to experience the simultaneity of multiple happenings except through certain mediations and certain limited mediations. The printed newspaper, where, for example, you might find on the same page news, from different parts of the same country, or from different parts of the world. If there was a global incident that had happened, that was what gave you a sense of simultaneity. And this is something that Benedict Anderson in his book Imagined Communities also refers to, the sense of simultaneity of occupying the same time, so that people could imagine a world in which they lived as well as other people lived. And therefore could imagine a connection between themselves. So in the pre-digital world, there were certain, mediated situations, or certain mediated technologies like the newspaper that allowed this sort of experience, this sense of simultaneity. Now, the affordances of digital technology has made it possible to study multiple such simultaneous developments. So I'll give you an example. For example, the affordances of digital technology has made it possible to study simultaneously the political mobilization of Lala Lajpat Rai, the great freedom fighter who spent the First World War in exile in America, in New York, and then traveling around. Also, the Mesopotamian campaign of 1914 to 1917, and the internment of Germans in British India. Now, at the broader level, of course, we know that all three are indeed part of the same story. And digitized archives allows us to uncover their simultaneous existence on a scale unknown before. But at the granular level, only a contextual knowledge and awareness of the different temporalities of the pre-digital world would help us to interpret these parallel yet separate experiences without making them interchangeable. They were parallel, but they were not interchangeable. There is a danger that with the digitized search, we would tend to make them interchangeable if we did not constantly emphasize context as key to understanding these. Now, if research and production has felt rather smooth for us historians who now work as, use digital materials for research, if research and production has felt relatively smooth, our preferred mode is still the published book or the journal article, but the changed modes of circulation of history have certainly roiled our world. And I'll talk now about, some of this, because with digitality comes multiplicity. Now, the archive as the embodied repository of the pre-digital era, embodied in the sense that we went there, physically, our bodies had to occupy the space of the archives, is now in some ways in conflict with the digital platform as the disembodied node. The archives, and if you like, the published book or the journal article, represents the realm of experts. Even digitally, it is still a digital realm of experts. But the platform, the social media platforms, the various sort of, tools that we have for communication, like blog posts and so on, that's a world that actually celebrates the irrelevance of expertise. And this is a contradiction that we have to negotiate and we have to interrogate. When we enter social media platforms as experts in our disciplines, we are entering a world which is not designed to validate expertise. In fact, I was in a conversation with the public historian Jason Steinhauer just last week, and I've just started reading his book, which came out in December, on e-history. And he was the one who pointed out that the web is not designed for expertise. And it actually does not celebrate expertise at all. It celebrates the demise of expertise. So the production of history is happening in a space which does not really laud the professional historian. The production of history is also happening at a rate and a volume that is unthinkable in the realm of academic publishing. Now, in this situation, we have to think about what digitality means. Now, in some ways, the digitization of materials is an excellent opportunity to uncover forgotten voices and narratives. We can, what would have been submerged in earlier narratives and earlier discourses of history, and what we have come to sort of call, the victor's history. That with digitization, it is actually possible to bring out voices that were submerged or that were marginalized, and that it is possible to look at both the dominant narrative and the peripheral narrative at the same time. And that is a wonderful thing to be able to do. But it is also easy, as I just pointed out, with digitality, to erase context, which is an absolutely essential component of historical production or the production of history. So the free circulation of information can paradoxically create a narrowing of discourse, a narrowing of analysis. Now, what does this do to history writing? And here I'm going to talk now about something else that has also become very important and interesting, and that is the graphical revolution. In 2020, approximately 1 trillion photos were taken by people using cell phone cameras and then sharing them, and of course using other cameras as well, but primarily, cell phone cameras, sharing them with on social media. And this ability to take pictures very quickly and to share them has also created a new modality of history production, not just for history, I think for all of us, whether it's media or literature or any other sort of, any of us who are digital humanities adjacent, we understand this. So the affordances of digital technology have allowed for easier and more cost-effective integration of image and text, which sometimes overshadows text. So what does this mean for my discipline, for history? Now, in experienced hands, the tools of digital humanities allows for meaningful study and for the visualization of large data sets. GIS technology has actually led to this a resurgence of historical geography. And data visualization tools can help students and researchers communicate the impact of historical developments to audiences. But at the same time, as I'm going to point out, juxtaposing events and personalities across historical eras by using images can create very, very erroneous ideas of both the past and the present. And I'll give you two, sort of quick examples to show you what I mean. One is, let's look at the really good things that one can do with images and the proliferation of images and their use in mapping. Now, this is a visualization of from the Slave Voyages website, which uses digital information, gets data from many tens of thousands of different repositories and collections, and one part of this is basically about visualizing what this experience of enslavement would have looked like. One of the ways in which this brings home to us very, very vividly this particular visualization was the sheer volume of enslaved peoples who moved in the networks of the transatlantic trade. So you had people who were enslaved on the west coast of Africa, being taken on the slave ships to South America and to the Caribbean and to North America. And this, in a sense, is able to capture for us what a lot of words would have gone into describing, and in a way it is a sort of a shorthand way of showing your audience or your readers what the slave trade out of Africa meant for Africans, the impact it had on the economies of both of South America and North America, and also in a way, to point out that the slave trade, although there was also a slave trade that went into the Middle East and into the Ottoman Empire and to the Ottoman realms, the sheer volume of the Atlantic slave trade overshadowed everything else. Now, this is in the hands of experts. It's a wonderful, wonderful website, and you can see how much it adds to our collective knowledge. But on the other hand, we also have problems with this abundance, right? You have fake history. This is part of the emergence of, the proliferation of, I would say, bad information online. And one of the things that we see is that because there are so many images, and these images, the digital images, are more malleable. You can right click and save. You can, put text on them and so on. So the malleability of images makes it particularly easy to integrate them into oversimplified historical narratives or simply wrong historical narratives. And essentially what you do is when people do this, essentially what they do is they render historical narratives, they sort of simplify them to the point of just being visual hot takes on very complex issues. So the questions again we have to ask is not just why, but what does it mean? Is it part of the proliferation of information? Is it this that there is just now so much information available that it is no longer possible for it to just be circulating only within the realm of academia? Or is it the structure of the digital realm that is also shaping some of this? The fact that history and any kind of knowledge is now no longer, or the web does not really, applaud or support necessarily expertise. Is this a problem that arises from that? Or are we more susceptible to falsehoods in an age of information proliferation? I mean, this is something that, people in media studies are, of course, also analyzing. Finally, what can be done about it? And what is the role of traditional media in this? As historians, of course, we also have to ask other questions. We have to ask questions such as who benefits from this? Who benefits from fake history, from fake news, from fake information? When things go viral online, who does it benefit? And who loses when the many-voiced echoes, which is the title of my talk, it equals cacophony rather than plurality, which is, something to be welcomed. So finally, I will spend some time talking about some other themes that may be of interest to all of us. And one of them, I'll talk about digital infrastructure. I'll talk a little bit about interdisciplinarity and labor and pedagogy, because along with all the problems, of course, there are also enormous potential in digital humanities. That's why so many of us are, in the field. We see the potential. This is where we want to contribute. Now, much as there is a lot of, potential things that can go wrong, there are also things that can go right. We have to talk about, what is it that we can, do right or do well in our capacity as digital humanities practitioners. So one of them, I think, is in infrastructure building, particularly in creating sort of knowledge knowledge architectures. Now, the place of the archivist is actually very important in the digital humanities landscape. And yet archivists and librarians are also marginalized in this space. Now, we all know that knowledge architectures, are not the same everywhere. And I think Arjun Sabharwal has explored this fairly well in his work. That, we have to understand the capacities of institutions. Not every institution has the same capacity to build knowledge architectures. But also that institutions may need to collaborate in order to maximize the benefits of these, of this new digital realm. And collaboration might actually also make digital humanities more resilient, so that it is not tied to the fate of just one or two institutions, but rather to the collective effort of several institutions. Now, digital affordances, are important. Digital collaboration is important. Digital humanities allows us to prepare our students to be better citizens and also to be better trained participants in the working world. So the question is, how do we go about this? And the answer is, I think, by embracing interdisciplinarity. Because digital affordances, digital tools, they now allow us to reach out and touch the whole world potentially. But community building of the kind that we need as digital humanists can also begin at a granular level within our own institutions, wherever we are located. So for historians, it means that we must collaborate in research and in course design with colleagues with whom we often do not collaborate. Colleagues like librarians, IT team members. In the world of digital humanities, we have to go against the grain of what we were trained to do as historians or as writers, and that is to be a solitary spirit. We have to, as digital humanists, have to work as, with a studio mentality. Now, this often requires us to rethink a lot of what, we were subconsciously or unconsciously, maybe we had internalized. And that is, we have to rethink what labor means in the digital humanities context. Because given what I've just pointed out, we have this enormous explosion of data and information. Its management and organization is as important as its analysis. We are all in this together, and we have to reach out across disciplinary silos. I am, for example, working with librarians in my institution to try and create infrastructure for open education resources. That's part of what my project is for the next few months. And hopefully out of that will come curated resources from our library collection, which can then be made available to any instructor who wants to use it in their courses. So that's one way. We need to create bridges within our own institutions as well as work, globally and collaboratively. Then in the world of, pedagogy. When it comes to pedagogy, we are confronted again with several options, and some of it is very confusing. There are literally hundreds and thousands of tools. And at this point, there seems to be the toolification of everything. There is a tool with which you can, catalog the photos that you take in archives. There are tools for mapping. There are tools for presentation, one of which I'm using right now. And there are so many tools that it is sometimes confusing. But overall, I would say that digital humanities and even the toolification of everything shows us that we are in an age of information abundance. And at this time, what we have to learn to do is to use our skills, our very valuable skills, by the way, to learn how to select the tools that work best for us, and further to introduce our students to these tools. Digital humanities makes us better teachers, those of us who are academics. As a history teacher in an age of information abundance, my students cannot be limited to what I am able to scrape together, as I had to do earlier, in an age of information scarcity. When there was just one copy of one book in our college library, we were very reliant on the physical library, its spatiality, its materiality. But now our students have more resources available on their cell phones than earlier, in entire libraries. So our role as teachers, and then certainly in my specific role as a teacher, as somebody who teaches history, my role has actually become more important, because I have to train my students to not be so instrumental in their search for information. But I have to train them also to be digitally literate, to be digitally aware of where they are looking, and to ask the same questions of their online sources as they do of analog sources. So as the saying goes, we may no longer be the sage on the stage, but we have to absolutely be the guide on the side. Contrary to what the web is telling us, that expertise does not matter, wearing our pedagogical hats, or in our sort of pedagogical spaces, expertise matters even more than ever, even more than before, I think, than in the age of digital proliferation, because we have to teach our students these skills. Now, just as digital archives helps us to recover forgotten stories by making them equally visible through text search, digital tools also helps us to be better able to teach our students and to reach our students. We can reach the quietest student, the student who would never talk in class, by offering them an option to, write online, on the discussion board, on whatever your learning management system is. And so we can tap into the data that these discussion board posts then give us to basically reach out to our students and to help them improve and to include them in the conversation. So if problem solving, collaboration, and creativity are the skill sets of the future, digital humanities are the ideal arena for students to acquire these skills. I think about what I have done as a digital humanities practitioner in my own discipline of history. I have trained my students to create podcasts, to create blogs, to create digital exhibits. These are projects that they and I are justifiably proud of and can show off. But I have also trained them in writing for the public. There is a certain mode of writing that I have taught them. Equally important, my teaching of digital humanities allows me to teach my students important skills like workflows, that is project management. They may not go on to become professional historians, but these skills will see them through many different, careers. So to end, I'll go back to my images of the mountains that I began with, and the mountains and Prometheus and Jupiter and so on. They represent this conceptualized oppositions between good and evil in Shelley's Prometheus. You could also argue in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Saturn is good, Jupiter is bad, Ram, Ravan, the Pandavas, the Kauravas. Now, Shelley wanted to reconstitute Prometheus as a liberating persona, somebody who forgave his tormentor Jupiter. And similarly, I think digital humanities offers us the possibility of transforming the experience of technology, of humanizing it, of trying at least to overcome discursive and structural boundaries. But the images of the mountains also should remind us that in our digital terrain, we are both the travelers as well as the builders. We are building our own terrain as much as we are, or as equally as we are traversing it. Similarly, as we move through this terrain, we need to recognize the structural biases that may get baked into digital humanities by ignoring issues of access and equity. Just as a mountaineer with, very expensive gear may be climbing his mountain and considering that an accomplishment, which it certainly is. But by acknowledging that, we should not also forget the humble woman who lives in the Himalayas and climbs her own mountain every day. So we should not ignore issues of access and equity. And I hope that we use the affordances of digital humanities to further our intellectual, professional, and personal goals without crowding out the voices of others. It is our job as digital humanists to study both the terrain and the voices of others. It is our job to also to dare to know, in the words of Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a period in the 18th century in Europe when the production of knowledge seemed to burst through the seams of human capacity. Now, in our own time also, the availability of information seems to overwhelm or seems to exceed our capacity to deal with it. But we have learnt this lesson in the last 200 years or so of history, that we do not have to know the entirety of history or of information in order to make certain generalizations about knowledge, about ethics, about possibilities. We are certainly within our capacity to investigate, the mysterious recesses and protruding peaks of digital humanities that capture our intellectual curiosity. But we do not have to know the entirety of it. We should be, we should not be anxious that we are working in our chosen subfields within digital humanities. There will be people who will have grand theories, and there will be people who will contribute by creating boutique projects. And each of those is equally valid in this new field. In the end, the many-voiced echoes of digital humanities, the many-voiced echoes remind us that the digital mountains down which these echoes roll are themselves contingent, shape-shifting, and created not by mysterious forces, but by human minds and the power of computing. I thank you all for being here, and I hope we all have a very productive and fruitful discussion of our work in digital humanities. I hope everyone stays safe, and I hope that in the future we can all meet in person to discuss these wonderful new frontiers of the digital humanities. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Your enlightened words would always be enshrined in our hearts. It is my profound pleasure to introduce our guest of honor to the audience, Dr. Bilikisu Maijama. Dr. Bilikisu Maijama holds a PhD in statistics from the University of Utara, Malaysia, and has several honorary doctorates to her credit. With more than 15 years of work experience in the most illustrious institutes from around the world, she has chaired several conferences, seminars, and workshops. Her research papers that have gotten published are the most prestigious accounts and most well-renowned among her other contributions to academia. She is currently an educator at the Nasarawa State University, Keffi, Nigeria. We are honored to have you amongst, ma'am. May I invite you for your address?
Good morning, all. My name is Dr. Bilikisu Maijama from Nasarawa State University, Keffi, Faculty of Natural and Applied Science, Department of Statistics. I'll start by apologizing for not being online at this particular point in time because of the difference in timing between Nigeria and India. I'll be talking about expanding career horizon through digital humanities. Digital humanities allows us to enhance our love for content area with digital tools in order to be equipped for critical thinking in this century. Looking at what digital humanity means, digital humanity brings together a variety of fields of study such as history, philosophy, English, and also some science-inclined subjects, to name a few. The digital aspect of the digital humanity requires us to use and design digital tools. PC Mark in 2017 referred to digital humanities as the most exciting field we've ever heard of. I'm sure from this statement, a lot of questions that comes to everyone's mind right now is, if it's actually exciting, then why haven't we heard about it? Probably because the digital humanities is happening all around us, with or without us noticing it. Looking at the imagining field as it relates to the digital humanity, Dr. Erin Lavridge defined the digital humanity as a field that prepares students not only in showing their content of knowledge in a particular field, it also exposes them on how to use digital tools. This includes areas, but not limited to history, English, and science-inclined fields. People in the field of digital humanity are expert problem solvers. They are great thinkers. They think critically on research and explore areas such as religious issues, social issues, science and ethical issues. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. Digital humanity do research and design tools to be relevant to both the local and global communities. Dan Cohen, a vice provost, dean, and also a professor at the Northern East University, talks about what digital humanity is. He says that digital humanities uses digital media technology to bring about the creation of scholarly resources, to research on those resources, and to communicate the results to individuals, colleagues, and also students. As we can all see, defining digital humanity is hard. But the digital humanity is a very broad field where content area meets digital media. This is why it can be tough to understand what this field actually is. One digital humanitarian scholar could take a literal approach and become an activist in the museum. Another scholar could master the same content but choose a different path and become a web designer. The field of digital humanities is rapidly growing in this millennium, as we can all see. This field blends lifelong learning with development in the 21st century technology with skills acquired for the global job in the recent market. If you are not sure of the job out there available for any digital humanitarian, you will be surprised to hear a number of opportunities that are out there for the digital humanitarian. One of those jobs is a web designer. A web designer relies on digital humanities skills to excel at visual design, creating new ideas and bringing it, adopting new techniques, communicating the new ideas to other clients and end users. We also have the curators. The curators acquire, maintain, store, and exhibit collections. They are involved with civic engagement, designing an exhibition, developing teams, creating and leading workshops open to the general public. And also specialists on digital humanities, also they manage projects, develop curriculum, workshops, manage digital archives, and can work with digital science. I'm sure a lot of people are surprised to hear digital data science in digital humanities. Let's look at how the data science is involved in the digital humanities. Data science is related to digital humanities as well as it belongs to also science and engineering. More than 50 years ago, an English researcher and a physical chemist, C.P. Snow, gave a lecture themed The Two Cultures at the University of Cambridge, describing the intellectual and cultural gap that has already opened between the fields of science and humanities. Both fields of sciences and humanities provide valuable tools for understanding the world. Each of these two fields will be incomplete without the other. Lamenting on the scientific and the technical ignorance of most researchers in humanities and the humanistic ignorance of most scientists is a major obstacle to human advancement. Decades later, the gap between the science and the humanities remained and perhaps become even wider. However, looking at the two fields will be beneficial because at the crossroad, we shall discover a remarkable opportunity. In the 1970s, Steve Jobs created his company known as the Apple Company in a way that deliberately blends the outstanding engineering with extraordinary designs. Jobs contributed immensely to the success of Apple, to this bringing together the liberal arts with computing. With the tragic passing of Steve Jobs, Apple visionary co-founder, humanities have lost one most articulating advocate. Jobs often ended presentation by standing in front of a slide and displaying two signs known as the liberal arts and the technology. We've always tried to be at the intersection of technology and liberal arts. And he will explain, to be able to get the best of both, we have to put them together. and bringing the digital humanity in the science. According to Jobs, Apple's success lays in the blending of humanities and computing. He thinks our major contribution was in bringing a liberal art point view to users of computer. The aim of doing this is to bring the liberal art perspective and a liberal art audience to what it used to be traditionally. Looking at science and computer science in general, we can say that it is a liberal art. It's something everyone should know, or everyone should at least know little about. It's not something that should be left for the few individuals, which recently we have just about 5% of the population being learned in this field. It's something that everyone should be exposed to. Everyone should have a mastery of it to an extent. And that's how we should view computation and all computational devices. Standing at a familiar intersection of technology and liberal arts, Jobs issues a final statement. He says, technology alone is not enough. It's a technology married with liberal arts, married with humanities, that yields us to results that makes our heart sink. The modern discipline of data science now, as we can see, is the most trending and marketable field. Data science can be seen simply as implying the arts and science of analyzing of data. When data is done, it stands firmly between two fields, science as much as humanities, drawing conclusions extensively from both fields. Now, let's look at how data science blends the two fields. Often, data science is mostly termed and described as an engineering field. It is frequently folded into computer science or statistics and also engineering department in most universities, and into engineering department in most companies. Since engineering is a major component of data science, calling data science and engineering erases the most essential parts of data science. For instance, a major tool of data science is machine learning. The use of algorithms for analyzing and making conclusions as much as making predictions and decisions based on results gotten from existing data. Of course, this would include and not limited to engineering problems. Implementing the algorithms falls clearly within the discipline of statistics as well as engineering. So, does the enabling of the algorithm, which are mostly used to analyze big data to run efficient on a powerful computer clusters? So does the processing of data into desired formats, which is often the most time-consuming and resource-consuming step. And so does the testing of the process to ensure it's smooth running. But ultimately, any data used for any research purpose must be from somewhere, and its analysis must be based on some type of assumption and expectations. In fact, the quality of data set often matters more than the quality of the algorithm used for the analysis. This term mostly is used by academicians as what we know as garbage in, garbage out. In other words, you get exactly what you give the computer for an analysis. When you have to collect a data for any analysis, you have to make questionnaire and distribute the questionnaire to individuals or through an interview. By doing so, you collect your data for the analysis. When you set your questions rightly to the individuals that are supposed to answer those questionnaire, you will definitely get outcomes that you actually are expecting from those individuals. But when the questions are not set in a way that you will get the exact response you want from those individuals, you find out that you wouldn't get the exact outcome you actually want to get from those individuals. That is, when we have a faulty data set, we will sure yield nonsense or no results is expected. And for sure, when we have a faulty data set, no algorithm can avert this. Obtaining a data set and deciding how it should be analyzed is a qualitative approach in every research, not quantitative research. Rather than being an engineering problem, it belongs to the field of humanities. This involves understanding in the descriptive sense rather than a quantitative sense of the data sets and its characteristics. If the data is of humans, it involves understanding them qualitatively. And intuitive logic is one guide on how data should be analyzed. The two fields on data science are the fields that are large in organization and more solid to terms and can become. However, even in most large organizations, the same people may be working on scientific, engineering, and also humanistic aspects of data science analysis. Also, at the same time, these people in each of these two fields may be working closely together. This is because of the need of frequent and clear communication across the entire team about the detail of data and the processing of the analysis. So not only is data science for people who are good or experts in engineering and sciences, but it is also good for people who are vast in social sciences and humanities. If data science is acknowledged to be as much part of social science and humanities as much as part of science and engineering, the development of fields in education and in training may go a long way through bridging the gap between the fields as we have seen. So conclusively, I want to show that a digital humanitarian can be everywhere. A digital humanitarian can fit into all profession. It makes all profession more vast and more vast and more researchable most of the time, because it brings out the life in every profession. Every profession needs the humanitarian aspect of that profession to give out the best from that particular profession. That's little I can say about expanding career horizon in digital humanities. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your highly insightful address. Now, it is a matter of immense pleasure for me to announce that the papers received for the conference have been compiled into an edited book for the conference. The title of this most awaited publication is Digital Humanities in the 21st Century, Emerging Trends and Future Prospects. The book has been published with its own unique ISBN. So, on behalf of Amity University Madhya Pradesh AUMP, may I request all the dignitaries to kindly grant us the permission to release the book online.
On behalf of Amity University and with profound gratitude, we request Professor Dr. Sharmishtha Roy Chaudhary to accept the token of remembrance. We sincerely request Dr. Bilikisu Majama to kindly accept a token of gratitude from Amity University.
Hereby, we come to the end of the inaugural session of this conference. The day has been a pure delight for us. Before we break for lunch, we have a few important announcements. Post lunch, all the presenters are requested to join the technical session that will commence at 1400 hours or 2 p.m. and end at 1500 hours or 3 p.m. You can join through the link that has already been shared. Another very important announcement, the certificates of participation will be auto-generated once you fill the feedback form, link for which will be shared at 1600 hours or 4 p.m. This link will be active for 24 hours only. Now, we shall meet again at 1500 hours or 3 p.m. in the afternoon for the valedictory part. This is Shravasti Mishra signing off. We may proceed for lunch now.
The IT team can do not close the session. Students can come and go, and the participants, me and Vice Chancellor and Iti ma'am will leave and we'll join back again. So the IT team, please do not close the session.
A very warm good afternoon to everyone and welcome to the valedictory ceremony of this one-day international e-conference on digital humanities in the 21st century, emerging trends and future prospects, organized by Amity Institute of Social Sciences and Amity School of Communication in collaboration with Dharti. I, Mahima Khalkho, extend very warm greetings and cordial felicitations to the revered Chancellor and Chairman, Dr. Aseem Chauhan, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General V.K. Sharma, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. M.P. Kaushik, Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Anil Vashisht, Registrar, Mr. Rajesh Jain, all the deans, directors, HOIs, HODs, members of faculty, research scholars, and students. Today, we are fortunate that this day has brought together the international community of researchers, scholars, and social scientists to exchange knowledge on all aspects of digital humanities, which relates to the intersection between digital technologies and culture. The interactive insights exchange by stellar speakers and participants will significantly influence the creation of cross-cultural interactions in the digital environment, both explicitly and implicitly. We are all indeed grateful that we have together with us our guest speaker, Dr. Dibya Dyuti Roy. It's my supreme pleasure to introduce him to the audience. Dr. Dibya Dyuti Roy is an assistant professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Digital Humanities Division in the School of Management, IIT Jodhpur. He has a PhD in Literary and Cultural Studies from West Virginia University, Morgantown, USA, and Master of Letters with distinction in Modernities, 20th Century Literature, Theory and Culture from University of Glasgow, Glasgow, UK. He also holds a certificate in Nuclear Energy and Law from the Nuclear Law Association of India and the Energy and Resources Institute, New Delhi. Dr. Roy is an accomplished scholar, educator, and administrator with over 10 years of experience working in multidisciplinary academic environment across USA, UK, and India. He has a public-facing publication profile with core research specializations in digital humanities, new media studies, and communication in scientific and professional contexts. He espouses inclusive critical pedagogy across undergraduate, graduate, and executive education programs that encourages critical thinking through extensive independent research, evidence analysis, and contextual awareness. He's the founding member of the Digital Humanities Alliance for Research and Teaching Innovations, Dharti, and organizer of the first Digital Humanities Conference in India. I'm profoundly privileged to have the pleasant task of welcoming you, sir. May I humbly invite you, sir, for your address. Please, sir.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Mahima, for that very kind introduction. A very warm good afternoon to all dignitaries present and to the Vice Chancellor and the Chancellor and to my colleagues and especially Dr. Narula Sumit, who's been very and has done congratulations to all of your colleagues. I'm also have the stage with two of my very close friends and colleagues in digital humanities, Dr. Nirmala Menon and Dr. Maya Dor. So just to add in a couple of things, the only one, we have a joint appointment across 3 disciplines or 3 departments, not in the School of Management and Entrepreneurship. It's Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Division of Interdisciplinary Research, Digital Humanities, as well as School of Management. And also I co-organized the first DH conference along with Nirmala here. So she was at IIT Indore, I was at IIM Indore before this for 5 years. I moved to IIT Jodhpur in May of 2021. So because we have limited time, I won't take a lot of time to have a conversation. Maybe we can have a little time for Q&A. So without further ado, let's sort of share screen and begin the conversation. I hope I'm audible. There's no background noise, no problem. Okay.
Yes,
thanks so much.
Everything is fine. Yeah.
Thanks, great. So yeah, let me start by sharing screen and yeah. So as you saw from the introduction, I have my institutional affiliation is with IIT Jodhpur, and I'm currently the Vice President and founding member of Dharti. My talk today is called Decolonize DH Paths Forward. So before I start off, I think it's only fair that I bring the conversation back to 2016 when we started this alliance called the Digital Humanities Alliance of India with many of our close friends and colleagues. And because there was a lot of interest in DH, we realized that there was a need for a national conference. And this national conference happened in 2018, and it was attended by a large number of people. But what really surprised us was the number of submissions we got, which was over 70 submissions, and made us realize that DH works in India in very different ways than the global north and in Anglo-American spaces. And I think that really enthused us to register our organization. And then DHI became Dharti, which is in 2018. And in 2020, January of 2020, we also organized India's first Twitter conference on DH just before the pandemic had actually come. So in that, we saw participation from a number of countries. Again, we've had, cross-cultural international publications and conversations on this. But today, I'm not going to focus on any of my own publications, my own research, because I don't think that's the forum for this. I think I'm happy to talk about them, but today I'm going to talk largely about the path forward for Indian digital humanities. And it's only fair that we talk about some of the initiatives we have taken in the last year or so, which includes the Dharti Speaks webinar series that's on YouTube and also streamed live. So we've done webinar series on YouTube, talks on electronic literature as DH. We've also done multilingual DH meets cultural analytics. And very importantly, I want to let everyone know that our conference, the Dharti 2022 conference, is coming up on February 21st to 25th. And I think very aptly, our conference this year is titled Digital Divides, Discontents, Debates and Discussions. So again, the dates are February 21st to February 25th. And this year we've made participation and registration as well as membership for the Dharti community free, considering the COVID pandemic. So I'll be sharing those links later in the talk, but I just wanted to sort of let everyone know. And of course, my colleagues Maya and Nirmala will also talk about it. So before I start today, I actually have a quick question. So my talk will be divided into 3 parts: DH context, and what is DH and why should you care about it? And finally, the conversation around Indian DH. So I start off with 3 pictures, right? So 6th pillar edicts of Ashoka from 238 BC, the Sogara copperplate inscription, which is from 3rd century BC, and a Kashmiri manuscript on birch bark, which is 17th century. So I just want to take a quick minute and maybe 30 seconds to just ask people if they could type in what is common to all of this. So Sumit, am I fair in understanding that every panelist here or every member in the crowd is allowed to mention their in the chat box? Is that possible?
We haven't opened it. I'll just
okay,
ask
that's
the
fair.
IT.
Then that's great. That's no problem at all. Okay, so the combination, what connects all these three things are, these are all documents enabling reading, right? These are documents enabling reading. And I'm sure many of you, whenever you hear the word document, immediately what comes to your mind is documents don't look like this. Documents are paper, right? So that may be interesting and worth interrogation, which is why we actually look at the etymological root of the word document, which comes from the Latin docere, to teach or show. So any object, once it is framed, becomes a document. And this scholarship is taken from Lisa Gittelman's fabulous work on paper knowledge towards the media history of documents. So what Gittelman claims is documents are tied to specific settings, and therefore any document that teaches or shows in a particular setting, any object that shows or teaches in a particular setting becomes a document. Therefore, all the three artifacts that I just showed you on the previous slide were either teaching or showing something, and therefore they are all documents. And interestingly, therefore, documents have existed longer than books, paper, printing, or the public sphere. In fact, the idea of the public sphere is largely something tied with print capitalism, which I'll come to a little later. So then, what it essentially I want to sort of summarize is that documents are materialities enabling humanistic inquiry. And humanistic inquiry is not the history of only close reading, the book or print culture. That's the key point, that the book is a technology and it comes obviously at a particular point of time. So then the question obviously rises that why is then humanistic inquiry, why do we always consider humanistic inquiry to be tied in with books? So that of course comes with the rise of the Gutenberg printing press. And therefore, with the Gutenberg printing press, our reading is entwined within print-born assumptions and our social, political, economic, and especially academic structures, right? So Gutenberg and his printing press lead reading to become entwined with print culture. But it's interesting to note that even reading doesn't happen the same way, right? We don't even read the same way. So if it's a really, really popular novel, we read it cover to cover. If we are going through a conference abstract like the one we are attending today, we read excerpts or selections. If we are going at a magazine stand, we graze or browse through books. If we are looking at, for example, the TV catalog on your mobile, you maybe skim or scan. And of course, there are some things you speed read, like while you're driving, you might speed read the instructions on the right to take which direction. And of course, some of you might not know this, but in our times, we used to go to reference libraries, take out catalogs and look at those catalogs and then requisition for books. So that's a different kind of looking, right? So, but the question then is that the only site for knowledge production anymore? Because there are about 50 to 60 million books in the world. And if you combine the Library of Congress, the British Library, as well as the Chinese Library, there are about 50 to 60 million books. And in comparison, and this is a data set from 2019, there are 1.72 billion websites. Of course, over the pandemic, this number would have gone up, maybe twice that amount, or at least 1.5 times that amount, right? Which means that digital spaces, especially websites, are a wonderful, I'm just using websites as one sample of the population. Websites are a very important part of the conversation of curating human knowledge. So what does that mean? Does this imply the death of traditional humanistic models of close reading? No, but we need to acknowledge that knowledge networks do not begin or end with the printing press, and digital platforms are significant documents of the print era. And of course, I'm going to qualify what digital documents are in a little while. So, okay, that brings us to the question, what is DH and why should you care? Clearly, if digital documents or digital platforms are an important part of humanistic inquiry, we need a new paradigm. And that paradigm is given to us by digital humanities. Okay, so what is digital humanities? It is the humanities in and for a digital age. Okay, so now on your screen right now, you see this visualization or image, which actually sort of talks about computing as the humanities. And some of you might already know this. The idea of digital humanities, while it sounds very ubiquitous now, started out as something called humanities computing in Anglo-American spaces. So Father Robert Busa, who tied up with Thomas Watson from IBM, did a concordance of St. Thomas of Aquinas's work, which is understood to be the first DH project. Okay, but as you can see, the humanities and social sciences have a long history with computing. So as you can see, these intersections like political science as intellectual property, cyber politics, history has philosophy of history of science and technology, media studies has literary theory, cultural studies, game studies, English has biography and editorial studies, languages as computer assisted language learning, computational linguistics. So all of them have had a long history of conversation with computing and the humanities and social sciences. And there's a wonderful conversation around how do you define digital humanities? So everyone has a different definition. For example, Nirmal and I have a publication in a series from the debates in digital humanities called Global DH Debates, where we trying to understand DH definitions in the global south. Okay, so the definition that I am personally quite fond of and I operationalize largely is digital tools, objects, and techniques to bear on traditional humanities scholarship. And this was provided by Elijah Meeks when he was at Stanford. I believe now he's at Netflix. So DH is a collective singular signifying a wide array of convergent practices. And this is from the DH Manifesto 2.0. And what does this collective singular do? It tells us that digital humanities needs to contend with data in or for at least 3 types of platforms. So remember why I mentioned digital platforms. So 3 types of platforms. The first one is platforms we use to presume data, produce or consume data. This is of course taken from Henry Jenkins's work on convergence culture and participatory cultures. Platforms that we use to analyze data, and platforms that we archive or publish in. So broadly, this is the definitions of digital humanities that we can operationalize. But it's also important to keep in mind who is a digital humanist. So if you think of digital tools, objects, and techniques, digital techniques would be a computational humanist for whom their research question lies in computational platforms. Digital tools will be a digital archivist who uses digital tools to archive non sort of digitized material for a specific scholarly purpose. And that's the difference between DHers and archivists. And happy to talk about that more. And the last one is DH objects, right? Essentially digital cultural objects. So a game studies scholar, a cultural multimodal scholar, these are all people who would be considered digital humanists. But it's also important to keep in mind, these don't exist in silos. They're all in conversation with each other. Excuse me. So for example, if you're trying to understand the conversation around a particular topic, for example, Virat Kohli stepping down from the captaincy of the Indian cricket team, just to take an example, and you want to find out everyone who's hashtag used, hashtag Virat Kohli still as captain. And you take all of that material from Twitter, you scrape that, right? So you're being a computational humanist here. Then you create an archive of it. That would take you to a digital archivist. And finally, you want to sort of understand the process through which digital cultures talk about important people like Virat Kohli or someone like this. So therefore, you can see that all these 3 are connected. They don't exist in silos. So that's a major point that I wanted to make. Now, while digital humanities, or the idea of digital humanities, which is essentially quantitative reading of what we understand to be qualitative text, has been there since the early 19th century. So 1887, T.C. Mendenhall published something called characteristic curves of a word composition, which is basically stylometry. And that has been there for a long time. But the reintroduction of digital humanities into the conversation actually happened through a publication from Franco Moretti in 2011. This was the New Left Review, if I'm not mistaken, where Franco Moretti, who was at the Stanford Literary Lab, what he did was he analyzed the scene, murder of the particular scene in Hamlet, murder of Gonzago, right? He analyzed that to understand. So basically, he made all the characters into nodes, and the conversations between them became the edges. So social network analysis of murder of Gonzago. And surprise, surprise, it was found out that Hamlet is the key character. Now, everyone, then his colleagues started saying that, well, you know, Moretti, what are you showing us that is new? We already knew that. So then Moretti points something out that's very interesting. He says, the goal is not to use the machine to supplant the judgment and expertise of a human expert who has spent a lifetime reading Dickinson, but rather to see if the machine classifications can provoke new insight amongst a body of familiar texts. So this is Matthew Kirschenbaum discussing the value of Moretti's work. So he uses Dickinson here as an example. Basically, there is no fight between distant reading. This is known as distant reading, where you use an algorithm or a computer program to read large amounts of text. So there is no fight between distant reading and close reading. It just depends on your research question. If your research question requires distant reading, you focus on that. If it requires close reading, you focus on that. If it requires a combination of both, you focus on that, right? So at no point of time is digital humanities trying to supplant what is known as traditional humanities, right? Traditional humanities methodologies, because close reading is also methodology. We cannot forget that, right? So of course, with textual material, there is also non-textual data. For lack of time, I'm not going to be able to show you all the links that are here. But if Franco Moretti leads the conversation on distant reading, the other sort of understood methodology in digital humanities is cultural analytics for non-textual data. And that is championed by a scholar called Lev Manovich, who's also a new media studies scholar. So how Manovich describes non-textual data is a wide range of formats which encompasses everything but language-based texts. And methods for analyzing and coding are already sort of existent. Some of them are already existent in the social sciences and some are new. For example, content analysis, document analysis, compositional interpretation, musical analysis are all existing methodologies. But how do you use digital tools to sort of add to that or augment those, right? So how does a non-textual data, how is it sort of used? For example, I'll give you an example here. A user-generated music video on YouTube can provide insight into how the creators of the video portrayed themselves, their surroundings, and the music. The viewer's comments on the video can help researchers understand the culture surrounding the media. So 3 things. You have the YouTube video. It tells you about the production cultures. It tells you about the creators. And if you scrape the YouTube comments, which is quite easy to do, you also understand how the viewers are perceiving that kind of cultural production and consumption. So this is the non-textual data paradigm. Now there's really, again, I'm oversimplifying to a great extent, but there are really 2 waves of digital humanities. The first wave, as I was mentioning, Father Robert Tubusa, Watson, which is the quantitative wave, which takes us to digitization projects, creating infrastructure, database search and retrieval, text analysis. And this also leads to the rise of multiple digital projects like Digital Done or the Rossetti Archive, or many of these sort of variorums. And one very famous variorum, which we'll talk about today, is the Vichitra variorum from India. So this is really the digitization projects where we are creating the process through which these texts become available to a large number of people. And this also leads to the rise of TEI, text encoding initiatives, which allow us to digitize such material, new metadata standards. So that's very important to keep in mind. The second qualitative wave is when these digitized materials are already online, we need interpretive research methodologies for digitized and born digital materials. So new digital toolkits, new disciplinary paradigms. One new disciplinary paradigm is electronic literature. Electronic literature is basically all literature that is produced without any print referent. So these are born digital and they are born on a network or a standalone terminal. And of course, the important organization to acknowledge here is the Electronic Literature Organization. And one of my students, PhD students, is in fact working on creating India's first electronic literature India organization. And Dr. Menon has been working on creating an archive of electronic literature in India as well. So there's a conversation around that, which I'm happy to talk about. Right. Now the question comes, how do you select the best DH research method, right? This is a very important question. So this is a conversation that's from Osman and Turten, where we talk about the axis of digitality and the humanities, where it's an intersecting axis where digitality on one end of the axis, on the y-axis, you have digitality as a subject of study, and on the bottom of the y-axis, you have digitality as a tool of study. And on the x-axis, you have the focus on technical development and the focus on theoretical understanding. So basically, this debate leads to this kind of a coordinate structure allows me to acknowledge the wide debate in DH about making versus doing, right? So is it making or versus doing? So many Global South DH scholars like me, like Nirmala, like Maya, we all focus and say that in India, making and doing happens simultaneously. And that's the process of decolonizing DH, right? So the vertical position depends extensively on every current research topic and therefore may vary a lot. It is also possible for us to move up and down, left and right. So this is not a normative referent, but a nice way for us to understand how DH research can be operationalized. Are people still with me? Sumit, are we still there? Because I can't see most of you.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm here.
cool.
We are here. We are
Right. So just to sort of bring things down on very sort of granular terms, when you select your DH research method, fundamentally, as I pointed out, what is the purpose of your research? This can provide a good indicator as to what research method will be most appropriate. Second, what DH skills or platforms might help you with your research? Do you have any experience from past research projects that can help you with this one? How much time do you have to complete this research? Some methods obviously take longer to collect data than others. How much data do you need? Some research topics need only a small amount of data, while others may need significantly larger amounts. I think the population and the sample that you choose are fundamentally important here, and keep a note of that, right? So your DH method, and that's why I put your DH in brackets. So Dibbo's research method or Sumit's research method, Maya's research method, depends on whether the research in question emphasizes digitality itself as making and developing things, or articulating an understanding about the digitalized world. So digitality here, this word, and every DHR has a different definition. But for me, digitality is the realization of digital affordances in particular contexts. So digitality in India differs significantly from digitality in Anglo-American spaces, North America, and even differs from different class, economic, social positions. So we have to keep those things in mind. Okay, so these are the couple of things I wanted you to mention. This is a white paper I highly recommend for scholars and students and peers who are in today. This was published in 2020 from the Alan Turing Institute. It's a white paper on humanities and data science special interest group. It talks about the challenges and prospects of the intersection of humanities and data science. And along with this, I want to acknowledge a close friend and a wonderful DH, an ally of DH work in India. This is Tarunima Prabhakar from Tattle. So Tattle Media Civic Technologies is trying to fight fake news and misinformation. And Tarunima has this wonderful article where she points out there's no such thing as raw data. Data is always inflected, right? So, and this is again taken, the second quote is taken from Johanna Drucker, who talks about how data pass themselves off as mere descriptions of a priori conditions, rendering observation the act of creating a statistical, empirical, or subjective account or image as if it were the same as phenomena observed, collapses the critical distance between the phenomenal world and its interpretation, undoing the basis of interpretation on which humanistic knowledge production is based. So when we acknowledge the fact that there is no raw data for that matter, right? The objective researcher is also, with some subjective biases that make it self-reflexive as a process. We have to then understand that just saying raw data makes little sense, right? So actually what we are essentially talking about is not data, but capta. So capta is taken while data is assumed to be given, able to be recorded and observed. Humanistic category acknowledges the situated, partial, and constitutive character of knowledge production, the recognition that knowledge is constructed, taken, not simply given. So the key idea here is, we are not saying there is no objectivity. Of course, there's objectivity, but we are saying that objectivity has multiple parameters inflected within it, which should always be considered when you look at a data set, when you look at an interpretation, even if it's really data driven. And that's the dangers of DH that I'm also trying to point out towards you, right? So a traditional humanist, when they say that, I read closed material, and you can say, oh, it's your subjective interpretation. And when a DHer says, I read it through tools have algorithmic biases in them as well, which needs to be considered before we say that this is the given. So at stake, often the fight that's understood, although it's not a fight, it's a productive contestation, is the authority of humanistic knowledge in a culture increasingly beset by quantitative approaches that operate on claims of certainty. To intervene in this ideological system, humanists must embrace and enact counter with conceptual tools that demonstrate humanity's principles in their operation, execution, and display. So please keep this phrase in mind, with conceptual tools that demonstrate humanity's principles in their operation, execution and display. So it's not just enough to work with data, not just enough to work with digital tools, but also be careful of the embedded biases and issues and the situated nature of those digital tools. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of the tools that I use, which have their issues, but they're all open source, right? And this is, for example, Orange, which comes from University of Amsterdam. It's a data mining software based in Python, and which is again open source and allows you to sort of play around with the way you data mine. There's of course Tags, which is a very old Twitter archiving Google Sheet. There's TW Explorer from the Knight Foundation at Northwestern Laboratory. There's NetViz, although NetViz is becoming a little problematic in recent times, but it's still a decent platform. There's the Dirt Bamboo archive that was created by one of the co-creators was Quinn, who you saw was one of 30's special speakers, Quinn Dombrowski from Stanford. This is sort of a compendium of digital tools available to you. And of course, by Stephen Sinclair and Jeffrey Rockwell's Voyant, which is very simple DIY, do-it-yourself kind of text mining web-based platform to do quick text mining and text analysis, right? So these are some platforms that I promote because it allows you to see those biases and problems while also giving you interesting new insights into humanistic material. So I'm towards my end now. I know I've been speaking for a while, so I just try to quickly conclude. I know I have 25 minutes. So Indian DH challenges and path forward. So what is the problem with Indian DH, right? There is not one problem, but many which are based contextually, right? So for example, I'm sure as both of us, Nirmala and I are in IIT systems, we know there's wonderful work happening on digitizing printed Indic text, but that with a high level of accuracy is still elusive because fundamentally for the last 30, 40 years, digitizing has only focused on Latinate cultures, right? So OCR is still quite nascent. It's growing, but it's quite nascent. What we term to be electronic literature in India, in most cases is not born digital, but digital versions of text that could have been existed in any earlier media. But this is an interesting point because it may actually allow us to challenge the definitions of electronic literature that come from Anglo-American context. Also, very importantly, DH has only recently started to consider the intersectional implications of technology, race, gender, sexuality, and interrogating the often masculinist ideologies of techno-positivism itself. So techno-positivism is this idea that if I have a cool tool and I can just apply it and whatever results I get, those must be good. So just because you have a tool doesn't mean that it gives you the correct answers or even the valid answers, right? And the last but very important problem is so India's pernicious colonial history that saw the do-it-for-me attitude of the British colonial imperialists percolating into social and educational spaces. Of course, that's further complicated by India's caste legacy, which sees sort of upper-class Hindu men often, and women in some cases, obverse to the ideals of building and making. Now, I don't say this loosely. I'll give you an example as well. When IKEA, the Swedish furniture brand, came to India, IKEA is known all across the world for do-it-yourself furniture. But when it came to India, IKEA had to tie up with Pepperfry because people weren't willing to make their own furniture. And because I was at a management school for 5 years before this at IIM Indore, we actually did a case study on this and found very, very interesting results, which we are happy to sort of talk about more at a later stage. Okay, so this is sort of where I'm sort of ending. I'm right now at IIT Jodhpur, which has pioneered India's first master's and PhD program in digital humanities. Of course, digital humanities has been there in some context as courses, as publishing groups like at IIT Indore, courses Maya teaches at Flame and many others. But the first master's and PhD program in this country was started by IIT Jodhpur in 2020. I also played a role in the curriculum framing of this in 2019. So I think it's a new start, it's a new beginning, and it's a new topography, right? Where not just this, so this is a quote from the DH Manifesto 2.0, where we are trying to recognize, that's why DH at IIT Jodhpur is an interdisciplinary research platform. It does not have people from one discipline, from multiple disciplines, so that it's open-ended, global in scope, designed to attract new audiences. So perhaps digital humanities itself becomes a distributed virtual department, overlaid on current departments, weaving together shifting archipelagos of researchers from intellectually and geographically diverse disciplines on the basis of overlapping research networks, right? So that's the hope. It's like, if you read Borges and remember that kind of map that is the size of the entire nation. So can DH then become that kind of a map, right? So to end, this is my last slide. DH in India is not, doesn't have like a primary beginning or a primary or an ending or even a secondary root, but it's more like ginger, right? If you've seen ginger, how it grows up in rhizomatic manner in different places, in different configurations. So DH in India is rhizomatic. It grows up in different spaces, in different configurations. And that is also within the social imaginary of the humanities in post-colonial spaces, which of course suffers from a colonial imaginary where humanities was taught to create babus for the British bureaucracy. So therefore, in the social imaginary, we have many issues like government and institutional funding, intersectional privileges, technological affordances, the GLAM sector and non-institutional bodies like Dharti, and a neoliberal world order and socio-political environment in the post-COVID world. But we hope that conversations like this, like what Amity Gwalior is doing, what Dharti has been doing for a long time, institutions around the country, will allow us to create a humanistic, anti-hierarchical, non-exclusionary and collaborative signified for decolonized digital humanities. So I end and stop sharing with that. Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving your valuable thoughts on digital humanities in 21st century. They were really thought-provoking. Thank you once again, sir. On this occasion, we are privileged to have Dr. Maya Dodd amongst us. I now take the privilege of introducing Dr. Maya Dodd to the audience. Dr. Maya Dodd received her PhD from Stanford University and subsequent postdoctoral fellowship at Princeton University, USA, and JNU, India. In South Asian Studies, a new opening for contemporary engagement with archives and digital tools has allowed for an exploration of new practices via digital humanities as a means to bringing new questions in imagining cultural issues to the fore in India, especially in terms of public history. She has been studying in the field as featured in the co-authored anthology, Exploring Digital Humanities in India. Dr. Dodd teaches literary and cultural studies at Flame University in Pune, India. Dr. Maya Dodd received her PhD from Stanford University in Modern Thought and Literature. Subsequently, she received postdoctoral fellowship at Princeton University with Committee on South Asian Studies and Center for the Study of Law and Governance at JNU, India. She also taught in the Department of Anthropology at Princeton University and an English department at Stanford and the University of Florida. At Flame University, she has chaired the Center for South Asia and teaches literary and cultural studies in Department of Humanities and Language at Flame University. Her research interests include digital humanities, South Asian studies and cultural studies, and her teaching is focused on digital classroom and archiving practices. May I request you, ma'am, to enlighten the audience with your address. Please, ma'am.
Thank you, Tulsi. Thank you so much for having me and us and our colleagues and giving us this sort of platform to think through, certain challenges of our times. I want to sort of draw some attention actually to my background and the fact that it is obviously a virtual background. We live in times where we are not necessarily sure about where we even are or where the other person is. And I think the disruption of this pandemic in many ways has intensified conversations around the digital. So for that reason, keeping in mind the power of remix culture, of user culture, and of the fact that we're actually located in India, I'd like to talk about the implications perhaps of digital humanities in the Indian context. So I'll sort of focus a little bit on archives, but my real sort of thought behind this presentation is kind of application based, right? I think Dr. Roy very ably walked us through the transition from the document to the book to the digital document. The idea of how distant reading, has also sort of captured our imagination right now. And also, what do we do with the born digital, right? And these are very big questions, not just for us in India, but sort of around the world, and people are grappling with them. But I think I'd like to sort of focus on the user, and for me, that person or that student or that researcher exists in the Indian context. So I would sort of like to take that question forward. Okay, So very sort of simply put, a lot of us are inspired by the work of Center for Internet and Society in Bangalore. And Nishant Shah, who used to be there and is a professor in Europe now, talked about sort of digital humanities as being an opportunity. And this is actually, these comments come before the pandemic. And I think the pandemic has obviously made us look at them in a very different light. But really speaking, it is a question about what is an affordance, right? And digital has been seen as a tool or a set of tools that lets us do different things. And if we're doing different things, that means we can build differently. And hopefully this comes from a different imagination of, where we wish to go. So the significance of this field, I think for all of me and my colleagues and Dharti members, is about building and negotiating new infrastructures that weren't always available. And now what do we do with these infrastructures, right? So part of this story sort of is mapped by a wonderful monograph by P.P. Sneha. She's at the Center for Internet and Society. And in many ways, the Dharti mission statement, which I pasted here and I hope you can see, is kind of an extension of the same thinking that CIS was also doing, which is about providing platforms to actually nurture, to mentor, and to kind of really engender thinking in this field, right? And this field, as Divya mentioned, is not finite and given and formed. It is completely in process. So for those reasons, we do believe it's important to kind of foster it at this stage while we're all sort of thinking through its possibilities together. I take this opportunity to focus on something coming up, and this is good news for everyone, I hope. This is a conference coming up next month, 21st to 25th February. And the focus of the Dharti conference this time is actually on the question of digital divides. Now, as much as we're excited about the possibility of technology and what it means for this sort of next era, we are also well aware there are people who are not necessarily in the same temporal zone as us, right? And in some sense, these are structural issues. These are questions of infrastructure. And they're also sort of about, I think, us redefining the idea of what is, who us is even, right? So for that reason, what I'm going to describe to you is not necessarily an academic story. And it's also not exclusive in some sense to a scholarly preoccupation. I think the reason the word humanities in this case is actually very, very meaningful is because it entails a sense of a collective future that impinges everyone, right? Not just those in this department or not, or that other department. Incidentally, the three speakers on this panel today are all from an English literature background. And we've come so far from where we began that I think in every other sense, we mark the need for interdisciplinary thinking. And as much as the NEP has discussed this, talked about it, highlighted it, our departments are not in any sense ready, to sort of really take this synergistic cross-pollination. So as Dr. Roy mentioned, right, Elijah Meeks, the scholar who has now moved on to Netflix, defines in sort of a very early moment digital humanities as basically being the application of these tools to humanities scholarship. And in a way, that's wonderful. And that is something that comes because of an affordance, because we have these tools, we can do new things with it. But more importantly, I think culturally, we are also at a moment of transition where the top-down moment of content or messaging coming only from one source has been sort of, transformed. And you have so much more user-generated content, participatory culture, so much more that can happen in the next decade and more, which is a function, yes, of the digital, but also of a different kind of historical moment that we occupy. And in every other sense, while acknowledging that access is very uneven in the Indian context, there is a sort of deep, I think, sense of what is possible, despite that inequality, both within and outside of the university. So I sort of invite everybody who is interested in registering for this to the link, the DH Dharti link. It's pasted on that screen. And what you do here is you can register for this conference to listen in to these questions about accessibility, the digital divide, and the fact that, these are not only, as I said, academic questions, they're questions of creativity, of distribution, of intellectual property, right? So whether we're talking about licensing content, whether you're talking about the distribution of it through certain platforms, a lot of these are, again, specific to context, and hopefully we can think through this together. So really, please feel free to register. If you go to this link, you will see in gray there is a link that you can sort of click and enter the form for that. All right, so that is my sort of first spiel really about why Dharti in some sense, and why this moment is so charged and so meaningful for what we are trying to do. And I'll just sort of now go back to, in a sense, the classroom and what is important there also for students, for researchers, those of us trying to do things with these tools. There's a sort of at least 10 years of effort that have gone into digitizing content, right? So as Dr. Roy mentioned, there are sort of things which are digitized, and then there are born digital artifacts. And again, the platforms that now exist have afforded a whole new set of objects that we can ponder over. Not just digital documents, but really visuals, images, films, sound, all kinds of things. So for example, the Al-Qazi collection, which is a very, very large collection of photographs privately held, is also sort of offering some things online which one can sort of look at. This is very useful for classroom work. And in a similar sense, the Indian Memory Project also offers you photographs from personal collections that people have themselves uploaded, right? But by creating this umbrella, whether it's for rare books or for photographs or for oral histories, you're letting other people take a look at what might never have been possibly public, right? And so in that sense, in addition to official archival materials, which the government of India has put out there through open data, through digitizing films division documentaries, All India radio broadcasts, there are also private efforts and crowdsourced efforts at kind of making this picture much more than just the official story. So, the question becomes that, okay, now we have, as I mentioned, some governmental initiatives. The mention of Vichitra already happened, which was this really massive effort that let all of Tagore's works ever written in any form sort of exist on one digital platform. And this was a wonderful sort of challenge taken up at Jadavpur. But the real question is, for very, very big projects, you obviously need very, very big amounts of money. And we don't live in a country where funding for departments or for the humanities, actually, I should say specifically, has been particularly forthcoming. So far, we see a lot of projects either existing in terms of accidental funding, where somebody from the European or whatever other agencies has given grants, or it's kind of it's born out of love, right? Through collectives who do that. In the case of student work, it's actually kind of unfunded. And I say that, with the spirit of the can do, because, we as students even otherwise had, I think, bootstrapped our way through college. And, there are many ways in which we find, answers to questions we don't often have precedent for. But in any case, efforts like this, and I'm kind of going now from the mega to the micro, the British Library grant that was afforded to digitizing 200 years of books, more than 1,000 books across Bengali, Tamil, Urdu, and I think now there's Assamese and some more, is fabulous. And it's a function of joint, government funding, right? So this is not something that any one of us gets up and does any given day because we feel like it. And in the meantime, something like, a cemetery where there is, again, cultural interest in that question. This is also foreign funded, or even the idea of Tagore as a great person whose works need to be viewed by all, is a sort of somebody else's imagination of what is important to document. And I'm not at all arguing that this is or isn't important, but I'm just pointing to the fact that when we look at the ecosystem of how things are funded, the users and the audience is sort of imagined in one direction, right? And then in the meantime, I think something happened. Anyway, in the meantime, we have people who are really interested in opening up archival questions, not just because other people think this important, but because these are spaces of their own story and of public memory. And public memory is not only, frankly, the memory of great people and great things, right? There's a lot of small stories embedded in these archives. And there is a lot of interest in sort of opening up what is called the GLAM sector, right? So the GLAM sector this is a site you can visit, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, where so much of our heritage or whatever is already residing. And by digitizing it, technically, we are kind of making this, popularized. Now, one of the things that happened last year, I think many people hopefully took advantage of it during the pandemic, was that museums really opened up their doors to the public in terms of the virtual tour. And this was a sort of also realization that there's a certain elitism to our institutions and to our archival collections that imagines a certain user and a certain audience. So, for example, if you wish to go to Nehru Memorial, what do you call museum, you would have to state why you're there. I am a researcher. This is the topic I'm researching, etc. And there isn't quite this openness about inviting, right, audiences who are not traditionally scholarly. But in the meantime, the need to remember our histories and to sort of archive them better is more possible than ever, and perhaps even more timely, right, in every other sense. So for all those reasons, it's important that we start rethinking the idea of a research community. Of course, it exists in colleges and universities, but it also exists in outside those domains, right? It's in the public domain, and in many ways, those interlocutors need to also be added on to the kind of research work that we continue to do. In terms of the language question, for instance, you well know there are many languages that are either dying out or have been under documented. So in that sense, also the sort of need to preserve, catalog, disseminate is very, very real, right? I'm not reading the slide out to you, but really you can sort of see the ways in which we can locate our own interests in this field. And the autoethnography, I think, is already happening. You see these, if you look at Twitter and such, there are these things which are already existent in terms of hashtags, in terms of accounts, Instagram handles, Adivasi Lives Matter, Dalit Lives Matter. No one's waiting for someone to tell their story. They are digitally rendering their own kind of voices in the way they deem fit. And I think this is a fabulous moment in terms of that possibility in the first place. But this sort of brings us to a whole new set of questions now, right? Which is about how do we deem that knowledge admissible, right? Back into the academia. How do we, like Dr. Roy talked about OCR, right? Just in terms of the challenges of, let's say, digitizing script. How do we narrate multilingual stories in such a way that there really is sort of the enhancement of audience? And really, how do we create through these stories a genuine advocacy for something different? So in that sense, I draw your attention, as I said, I'll go from the mega to the local, something which has been going on at Ambedkar University for a while. There's a Center for Community Knowledge, and they began by sort of recording oral histories of people who had stories to tell about Delhi city. And it is, again, not about, as they say, this is not traditionally represented within written histories of power and royalty and such. But the point about common people stories is that this is actually our collective memory. And now what do we do with sort of, all of these collections? How do we render this, into a space of impact? Pari, which as many of you might know already, is started by journalist P. Sainath. P. Sainath wrote this book called Everybody Loves a Good Drought in the 1980s, when he was one of two or maybe only journalists reporting on rural issues in India. It is self-evident what the need of this sort of repository is. But the fact of the matter is that this is now kind of, you could call it an unofficial space or a, complementary space of just sort of telling, sort of not just stories, but actually sort of lives of people who are not necessarily admitted to the official register, let alone, the university classroom. Now, as I mentioned, the Ambedkar University example was about a city. This has a very large scape. This is also kind of crowdsourced. People can upload their own kind of recording and such. And similarly, in the case of the 1947 archive, this was begun by a physicist. She didn't, I don't know if she finished her PhD, but she was at Berkeley when she began this. And in some sense, this could only have been a diasporic project, right? Because to get stories of partition from across the border and around the world required access, which was not, because they're oral recordings. Back in the day, they were actually physically recorded. Now they can be done digitally also. But the point was that these are meaningful for sort of international audiences, not just for the sort of citizens of Pakistan separately and India separately and where else separately. But the point is that the idea of the imaginary in terms of who is your audience is beautifully sort of captured by both Pari as well as these other projects, in the sense that you don't know why this lived experience may become meaningful to a future generation, right? And I mean that in terms of scholars and communities and all of that. So, okay, so now we have, like, for instance, let's talk about the 1947 archive. The archive, which I think began in the late 90s, early 2000s, migrated to Stanford very recently. And it's interesting that they have twinned it now with the oral historian program, where you can take an online training workshop and you too can contribute to this project once you certify in the sort of research ethics, whatever, training that they offer. That basically means that because we've had the ability of online, lessons and delivery of knowledge, you can also, how do you say this, imagine sites and projects and such much beyond what might have previously been possible, right? So this, as I mentioned, is an affordance which comes from the use of certain tools. And this is sort of something that inspires me. And I don't have an Indian equivalent. If I did, I would totally put it out there. But the real question is not the tool or even the imagination of the audience, but what do you do with these tools, right? In the case of this, and this is from 2015, so it's not very recent. This is literally about imagining in the US, geographical space where lynching sort of took place, and it kind of immediately lets you know how deep the Deep South was in terms of their history of atrocity with slavery versus, let's say, the Northeast or other parts of the country. Now, I imagine this as being a very useful model to render digital history with regards to Indian issues, or anyone's issues, but really specifically with South Asia, for the reason that we have not brought in a visual imagination to our history. We have a sense of history and then we have another kind of set of concerns, but we don't often map them together. So I give you this as an example of, again, a horizon of possibility. And these are, and I think Dr. Roy also shared many guides, but this one, if you can see, I don't know if you can, it's right from Florida specifically. You can literally type in, what you want to do in terms of like text mining or something, and then they will suggest you which tools you can use. And it's great, right? Obviously, we want that guide for tools, but more importantly, what is the research agenda that we'd like to use the tool for, right? So here also, like I showed you the slavery map, the lynching map, not the slavery map. Similarly, look at this one. This is a mapping police violence one. And I believe this can really impact questions of social justice. This can impact the way in which people think of their scholarship as linked to service learning, where you actually serve a public need. These sort of examples of whether it's preserving a city's history or oral history of partition or other sort of things that we talked about, allow us to maybe revisit not just history, but where we've been, right? Who we are, where we've been as people, and to kind of also for that reason, join up in a whole different configuration of how we imagine community. So collaboration in another sense is absolutely novel for the humanities, coming from digital humanities, which is very project-based, team-based. It's not a solo play. For a lot of us who understand how academia has become in terms of publishing, I think Dr. Narula's work is also on identifying fraud journals and all of those metrics. There is a need to do meaningful work with genuine application and end. And for that reason, our teamwork is important because in a sense, we can do more together than we can solo. And in other ways also, it is what is called, in cultural studies kind of terms, passing on the microphone, right? Pass the mic. That enough of talking in the name of somebody, let other people's voices get heard, not just the translator, the interlocutor, the middleman type of person. And hopefully in a sort of more cumulative sense, this allows for greater advocacy where we, rethink how we, do things. I'm leaving you with this because I've used these in my classroom. And if for anybody who is interested in looking at utility for teaching, I'd like to sort of share this as a meaningful thing that worked for me. When I started in the field also, I didn't know what I was doing at all. I didn't even know I was in the field. At some point, I realized this is what they call it. And don't feel like you're, late to the party. The party has honestly very well just begun. So in that sense, also looking at timelines, databases, and archives, I want to share with you some examples of where you can skill up, okay? And I say this because all of us are using, hopefully, this time at home and in the pandemic to also kind of look at other spaces of learning and where things are, happening. This is a fantastic site called the Programming Historian. And again, totally tutorial based. Anyone can self-paced style learn if they choose to. I want to also end with this example, of a project that came out of my classroom. This is actually 3 years old, and they kept on building it over the 3 years. So they started with basically crowdsourcing community cookbooks. Many of us have handwritten grandma recipes, or even sort of a very small, how do you say, popular prakashan kind of, one-time print of something. And as they began collecting these stories, they got more into oral history, also started realizing that, sometimes it's not just the printed word, it's also the oral that makes these things meaningful. And then they created timelines, which are a beautiful tool that is open sort of source access to anybody. It's called NightLab, and it's a timeline tool. And what they did is they put all the open domain cookbooks into this timeline. So they started chronologically arranging this. And I'm sure many of you can use this as a very useful way of thinking through information in your own classrooms. And honestly, it was so surprising how much this project kind of got featured, and people found this interesting. So not only did these students who began as first year college students get like written about all over this country and wherever, but also they just recently won an award, and this is for emerging open scholarship, and they're the winning entry from India. So of course, like a proud parent, everybody feels that moment. But really, I think the joy moment of this is to say there is a need for slow thinking, long-term planning, where you don't actually sort of think you know what you're doing when you start doing it. You don't have to know. As long as I think the intention is in the right place, many things can happen. Today, we're talking about digital divides, and we're imagining the future. And I also want us to kind of hold this thought, while we do that, which is there will be a time when computing is ubiquitous. There will be a time when the divide will not be a concept really. And I think it's important to also foresee what will happen when that comes to pass. So thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving your valuable insights in the area of digital humanities in the 21st century. Ma'am, your address has paved the way to understand the new forms of digital humanities emerging through the current situation across the globe. Thank you once again. We are also honored to have amongst us Dr. Nirmala Menon as the guest speaker. It's my proud privilege to introduce her to the audience. Dr. Nirmala Menon is the Associate Professor at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, English Department, IIT Indore. She had also been associated with St. Anselm College, Department of English, Manchester, NHUSA, as the Assistant Professor of Post-Colonial Literature. She has also served as a lecturer at the University Writing Program in the George Washington University, Washington, D.C., and as an academic advisor to the Division of Letters and Sciences, College Park Scholars, University of Maryland, College Park, US. She completed her MA from University of Maryland, College Park, and did her PhD from George Washington University, US. Dr. Menon is an avid researcher and has to her credit numerous publications of articles, book reviews, and research papers. Her research interests include post-colonial literature and theory, globalization studies, critical and cultural theory, 20th century British literature, translation studies and theory, world literatures in English, and digital humanities. We are honored to have amongst us today such an eminent academician as you, ma'am. May I request you, ma'am, to enlighten the audience with your address. Please, ma'am.
Thank you, Mahima. And thank you for that introduction. I think, Sumit, we can just actually finish it with Maya, because, both Maya and Dibya have kind of covered the kind of work that we have been doing collectively as well as individually. So I'm going to try and.
There is a lot more with you, ma'am. You are the one that we looked after and we look for. So anything from your side?
So I'm going to just try to do. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let me just make this full screen. I'm going to try and touch upon some of the things that that Maya and Dibya were not able to cover. So first of all, I want to say that that was such a nice transition from both of the speakers in terms of what we are trying to do as Dharti and what we kind of think about Dharti as an umbrella forum under which all these kind of diverse ways of understanding DH can be operationalized, to use Dibya's term, in India, and to just kind of give some ideas or thoughts of ways of moving forward, and what are the ways in which we can think about in India. I'm sorry, and also that there is nothing, there is no set path. As Maya pointed out, it is still very much a work in progress. It's an organization that is a work in progress. The work itself is far too diverse, and none of us can really give you a complete comprehensive idea, and we should not be able to, because there is still a lot of work out there that we ourselves are not aware of. Dibya mentioned in his address about this hesitancy of using the word digital humanities, which just yesterday I came across someone whose project appeared to me as very much falling within the moniker of digital humanities, but the maker was not quite ready to say that this is a digital humanities project. So even the term itself is in the making. Right. So I would like to kind of focus on, the regional turn in digital humanities in India. So in terms of language, and that anything that we do has to be cognizant of the fact that we are creating or making projects for a very multilingual and culturally diverse landscape in India. And what are some of the projects that I have worked with in our lab here at IIT Indore, and maybe some of the issues that that affect us deeply, and are global in scale. So they do affect us in very different ways, and I will get to that in a moment. Especially with respect to the 1947 archive that Maya mentioned, which is a very important archive, and while we think about all of these different issues, the different projects, the funding system in India, the funding for the humanities, the different courses, the pedagogy, all of those things, when we try to put it together, the one term I think about is infrastructure. What are some of the institutional as well as funding infrastructures that are available to us, and how do we convince collectively to our funding agencies as well as to the government of India that there is an acute need to invest in developing these digital infrastructures for our research projects, and that those projects, it is very important that the home of those projects be in some way, without sounding nativist, that we have some kind of control over how those projects are shaped, right? And resources, and it does come down to resources, right? So I'll just spend a minute on this, because a lot of the differences between digital humanities and the humanities, and I agree with my friend Dibya that I also look at digital humanities as projects that are using or harnessing digital tools, or looking for some digital tools to understand traditional humanities queries. The fact that the work that we do today is done in a digital age, and that a lot of the questions that we ask are both kind of born digital, as well as are, are operating on digital scales, it is important for us as well as our students to understand that. So the ethical, the other questions that traditional humanists have always addressed don't go away. So, but it is important for us to realize, also understand how they are formed, who is conceptualizing it, what is the technology being used. Some rudimentary understanding of the technology becomes important for us to understand what are traditionally humanities questions. So these are some, so that requires also a bit of unlearning. So as humanities scholars, we are used to working in a particular way. And I always, I like to quote this article from Nature that came out like a few years ago, that talked about the problem of, what they termed as kilo authors in science fields. So the kilo authors, as per Nature, were articles that were like, say, 20 pages long, but had about 1,000 authors. And they felt that this kind of, was a sense of gift scholarship in the sciences that needs to be addressed, right? And I read that and I remember thinking that in the humanities, we have an opposite problem, that we do not collaborate enough, right? So if we are working on a project that has one person, mostly, we all are so used to writing monographs, two people, when there's more than three, we start becoming uncomfortable. So I think one of the things in digital humanities is to understand that, we work in large scale collaborations, and every one of us, brings different things from different disciplines and different expertise to the table. So large scale collaborations are one of those features, I think, of digital humanities projects. And then linked data, computational cultural studies, some of which I think, both Maya and Dibya have already addressed. But some of those big projects like Shodh Ganga, like the National Digital Library of India, again, require the funding of scale. And unless we have that funding of scale, each one of these projects together only then will add up to an infrastructure that will facilitate more projects to both be, conceptualized, developed and built here in India. The doing and the thinking, the doing and the building, as we like to say, right? So this was like, there's something that I did, two of us did for Maya's collection of digital humanities in India, where we tried to look at digital pedagogy across Indian universities. And, as Dibya pointed out, there are some universities and institutes where you do have courses in digital humanities, programs, research groups. But we also found that across the country, there are many, many universities that do have, combined courses that kind of, harness the digital. Let me put it like that. So they're not exactly, identified as digital humanities courses, but this was, way back in 2017. And I think since then, a lot more universities and institutes have kind of institutionalized digital humanities as certificate courses, as minors, and in in the IIT Jodhpur case, the MSc plus PhD. We have like a data science and an MS program that has a digital humanities track. So Srishti, I think, has, Flame does. So a lot of universities are beginning to understand the importance. So we are, along, as Dibya said, along with Dharti, kind of discovering the emergence of the field in India. Right. So, problems in the Indian context. So again, this is something that we all find from our own vantage points, the things, the students, and the projects that you can work with based on your expertise. This is not at all comprehensive, it is simply indicative, right? So what are some of the computational projects? The OCR software is a continuing problem, and we still find that digitized text, as well as OCR readable text with high amount of accuracy. Just today I was talking to a student who is working on partition textbooks, and it is difficult to find digitized versions, and B, when we try to put it through some OCR software, the accuracy levels are around 60 to 62%, which is far lower than for English, which right now it's about 90 plus. Some languages in India, it's slightly better than the others. For example, Bengali has a higher accuracy than some of the other languages, but that is still a continuing issue. So what, again, that connection is something that we need to understand. Like in this particular project, we were trying to look at a huge corpus of text using OCR software and then trying to do some qualitative analysis. But we ended up having to kind of limit ourselves to maybe only 4 or 5 texts through, that we will use OCR software for, and then clean the outcome. So, then individually sit the students and the PhD students would sit and clean the text so that the accuracy level is higher. So it kind of not having software capable of reading Indic text does limit some of the things that we can do. But there are people working on that. And with respect to electronic literature, I think I've talked about this before too, and Dibya mentioned the ELO. And I think, understanding what the ELO was doing, and ELO volume 1, 2, and 3, the realization that there are no Indian entries into the electronic literature volumes made us in our lab think about why that might be the case. And that again was about 4 years ago. And now at the end of 4 years, we will be having the first anthology of electronic literature from India, which is published. It's only, about 22 entries, but they are in 4 different languages. And they should be out. They should, the publication should be out soon. We're almost there. So I think, again, pointing to that, lack of infrastructure. So it was not that, that there was no electronic literature being produced in India. And I want to say that, it was my friend, our friend actually, Shovik Mukherjee's article about electronic literature that set us thinking about it. Is that really true? How is it that, we don't have any electronic literature in India? So these conversations are actually important because, they lead to more conversations, they lead to, more understanding of what needs to be done, and then how do we get there. This, I think, Dibya just quoted this about the intersectional implications of technology, so I will not dwell on that. I just thought I'll take you through 2 or 3 small projects. Again, I want to say that as Maya pointed out, that when we started the lab, the DH lab in IIT Indore, I was very new to the field. My students really didn't know anything. And most of what we have done, from small projects to bigger projects, have been, learning and unlearning things that we knew. So it's really, trying to see what are the gaps and how do you kind of, get there. This particular scholarship, this particular project actually also came from a very literary work that I had done before this for my book, and to develop a scholarly database for Indian languages and literature. So this was simply a citation and a bibliography on the lines of the MLA bibliography in 4 different languages. So this was in Hindi, in Malayalam, in Bengali, and a collection of research scholarship from the Northeast. So they were in a couple of languages in the Northeast. And the selection of these languages was very random. They were just languages that were familiar to me and my students in my lab. So we hope to scale this up as a project and may have it more crowdsourced. At this point, it is simply, a citation with a small abstract, both in English as well as in the original language of the scholarship. So it was just a way of making sure that of the discoverability of research happening in literature across these 4 languages. So again, we all crib about this a lot, but it's lack of money that we have not been able to really scale the project as we would have liked to. The second one is my student, Shefali Arora, Dr. Shefali Arora. And this is, 1947 partition on the margins. So this was a project where, she wrote about the partition experiences of a very small community in Rajasthan. that moved only 50 kilometers during the partition, and so did not face the kind of physical violence that is often, associated with the with partition. However, their journey and their stories and their attempts to revive Sairaki, the language that they used to speak, and their lack of access to that language, because when they crossed the border, most of them wrote down their language as Hindi, and so subsequent generations really did not speak Sairaki, but now they're kind of trying to revive that. So this is a story about 1947 partition on the margins. I want to come back to this partition question a little later, and I'll tell you why. But this is also kind of continuing from that work, but this is using some of the NLP tools to look at identification and mitigation of bias in textual data. So we are looking at textbooks and how textbooks are narrating the partition on both sides of the border, in India as well as in Pakistan. And then looking at what this is where I said that we had to really tone down in terms of the number of texts we can use, because we are not, we think that it will take far longer time, because the student also has to complete her dissertation. So we are going to do a kind of a telescopic and microscopic reading. So we will have we will be using NLP tools to kind of identify semantics and data from the text, but then we'll also be doing a close reading of the text. And we have used some simple NLP open source tools. This is, Stanford's GLOVE, the fast text, Google's Word2Vec. And now we are kind of, in the process of analyzing the data that we got from these textbooks. And then we are going, so this is a kind of a two-way process that I think Dibya touched upon, which is the digitality. I mean, harnessing the tool to get the data that we want to kind of get a telescopic reading before we kind of delve into it. But also at the same time, and this we have experienced with each one of our projects, is that we also end up both publishing, but also discussing a lot about the limitations of those tools themselves, right? So most of these are tools that are already there and we are using them. And you find that many of them don't really work for the particular project that you have in mind. And so we also end up having a critique of the tools themselves. Right? Language is just one of those issues. And that needs to be addressed really, on scale. But there are also other, embedded parameters in each of these tools that are often don't work for the kind of questions that we want to ask as humanists. So if we come across that, don't get scared. It's that is going to happen, and only when you point it out and we try to tweak it, either yourself or with help from someone who is in computer science or is a computer scientist, sometimes you actually end up having better versions of the same tool. So one of the things that I want to touch upon, and I don't want to take a lot of time, but is the question of open access, right? And let me kind of take on or kind of continue from what Maya was talking about the Bichitra project, right? So I always look at, the digital humanities projects in India as like the Bichitra project and Project Madurai. So these are kind of two early projects that we now kind of retrospectively recognize as DH projects, right? And the difference between these two projects is that Bichitra is a very institutional project. It's it's a bunch of academics in Jadavpur University who came down and, who kind of built this one amazing, it's wonderful project. Project Madurai, on the other hand, is the kind of a predecessor for, say, Pari and other projects that Maya just showcased, which is an independent project. It was a group of people who came together to build this because they were interested in the subject and they wanted to kind of, create a platform and a database for that. So you kind of see the two different ways in which we have digital projects in India, very institutional, very academic, but also very public. all of them are, a labor of love. All of them are labors of love. Most of them don't seem to get a lot of funding. So I think that shows the diverse ways in which digital projects can be built too. So they can also be group. Right now, we do have collaborations that are a combination of both. You have public universities and academics along with, say, private partners or independent like the Center for Internet and Society and groups like that. One of the projects that I really think is interesting on both counts is the Swatantatra Malayalam Computing, scm.org, which is an amazing project because it is completely open source. And it is very focused on Malayalam. So it has got like, morphology generator, it's got translation, it has got like, predictive text, all of those things for Malayalam. And so I think that's a very interesting example of a project. I'm not quite sure, like, whether it is certainly a public and open access project, but the people who are involved in it, I think, come from both public and kind of, private spaces. I'm not quite sure because the website is not very clear on that. Right. But it's a very interesting project for, any one of you to take a look at. And the National Digital Library of India, again, is really reflective of the kind of funding that is required by the government or by any public, funding agency to create repositories of that scale. And I think, that today I just went to check it out after a long time, and I realized that they've really expanded in terms of the documents and, the text that they are now making open access. Right. Before I end, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, but before I end, I want to say that I think the question of open access is something that we have to discuss, and the question of publishing. We still don't have a publishing infrastructure, research publishing infrastructure in place that allows us to go completely open access in terms of our publications. We are still dependent, as Maya pointed out, to resources and big funding from universities across the world. If you think about this money, the amount that we need, it's not a lot. And I think it is incumbent upon us to convince the funding agencies that it is worth that investment. And I think that's the only way we will be able to have those kind of projects of scale. That project, the Partition Archives project, was an open access project. It was a project that was started by, Professor Kavita Daya way back in, I think, 2010 or so, and was with the George Washington University for some time, and later on has gone to Stanford. Now it is at Stanford. Now, one of the things you'll notice now when you go to that 1947 Partition Archive is that if you share a story on that archive, you can kind of, ask for a copy of your story. Right? You can, they have links, they have citations and bibliography, right? But we don't, since I have not shared a story on that platform, there is no way for me to access the stories. And I remember this project in its inception, where you could actually go there and listen to partition survivors and their stories. Anybody could listen to them, understand those stories and understand that. Now it is behind I don't know if it is a paywall, but it is certainly not open to the rest of us. So in some ways, part of me thinks that these are our stories. The partition stories are our stories, and my students or your students or students across this country cannot really directly access that. And that is something that I've found with all the, the British Library funding, where, you do find that we have access to it. Some of our elite institutions have access to it because we pay for it. but not everyone has access to it. So that question of open access, and I don't have the time to go into it right now, but I think that question of open access, how to navigate that, how to negotiate that, and to create an infrastructure that allows our researchers and our faculty and our students to be able to go open access without compromising on rigor or quality, I think has to be a conversation that needs to be far more louder than it is. I know that Sumit works in identifying journals, predatory journals, and I think that's a very important part, because you have both of those sides of the same question. One is that there is an influx of predatory journals. The other is that our institutions and our universities require us to publish in certain kinds of journals with a certain impact factors, oftentimes with prestigious publishing houses. And many times those publishing houses and the sheer numbers of projects or papers that they will publish from, say, from the subcontinent or from South Asia would be far less than that we would like. I like to think, and certainly from my experience, that the work that our students do and our young researchers do are certainly worthy of being published in very good places. And so that means those good places should, some of them at least, should also exist in our midst. And it cannot be it cannot be that we are always looking elsewhere for our research to be disseminated. So I'm going to stop there. I don't want to read out the last kind of paragraph that I've written, but I'll stop there and I'll take questions. So I'll just end with this thought that unless we think of all of these issues collectively, both as research objectives, as digital humanists, that I'll go back to what Dibya said about both making, doing, and thinking. So the conceptualization, the ideas are there, but to build it and acknowledging and legitimizing that building, right? So, to just give you a comparative example, that if you do a particular experiment in science and that experiment fails, you still are, you still have a protocol that has failed, and that protocol is published, and there's an acknowledgement for that work, right? If you make us, even today in India, it's changed a little bit in other places, but in India, if you make a scholarly edition of a text of the 18th century, it still may not be considered enough to be awarded a PhD. So within the humanities and social sciences too, we have to have that, we have to break that distinction between doing and thinking, and somehow not always hierarchize it. I'm not, thinking goes behind every doing too, and we often miss that connection. So I'm just going to stop there, and I'll I guess we'll all take questions if there are. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your highly insightful and learned remarks. For the benefits of some of you who could not join us in the morning, I would like to introduce Honorable Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General V.K. Sharma, without whose able and inspiring leadership, this conference would have not been possible. General Sharma had a brilliant career in the Indian Army, where he served for more than 40 years and retired from second highest post of Lieutenant General for his outstanding service to the nation. He was awarded the Ati Vishisht Seva Medal. Post-retirement, he joined AUMP as its founding Vice Chancellor. Under his able leadership, Amity University, Madhya Pradesh, has grown by leaps and bounds and has been adjudged the best private university in Madhya Pradesh by CMAI in May 2014, and thereafter for consecutive 3 years from 2017 to 2019. In the NIRF ranking announced in April 2020, Amity University, Madhya Pradesh is amongst the only 2 private universities of Madhya Pradesh to have been ranked, thus making it one of the best private university of Madhya Pradesh as per NIRF. He has also been instrumental in introducing a host of best practices aimed at fostering academic excellence in the university. May I now humbly request you, sir, for your concluding remarks. Please, sir.
Dr. Divya Dhyuti Roy, Dr. Maya Dor, Dr. Nirmala Menon, Dr. MP Kaushik, the Pro Vice Chancellor, Dr. Anil Vishish, the Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor, Dr. Itirai Chaudhary, Dr. Sumit Narula, the two conveners for this conference today, Dr. R.S. Tomar, all HOIs, and all the attendees and students who are participated in today's international conference. The topic was very apt and something new to which we were not accustomed, because we never thought that humanities could be digitized. We always thought that digitization applies only to maybe technology or only to financial transactions and only to some research data which is available, to big data, analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and we thought that humanities had got nothing to do with this. But which is now not the case, knowing that the amount of data which is being generated from all sources, everything is generating data. We have not only the internet, we have internet of things, and then we have internet of everything. To collate the data for humanities is very essential, although like one of the speakers mentioned that it is like a ginger spreading. So there are pockets in which the data is available. It needs to be collated. It needs to be gathered. It needs to be processed. It needs to be analyzed to get intelligence out of it. Raw data is of no use unless we can draw conclusions and intelligence and use the data for research work. But the time has come now to say that the digital humanities in the 21st century is a thing which is to reckon with and a thing which is here to stay. And I think to that extent, the speakers have given their views, starting how best, who is responsible for this, whether it is the academicians or it is those who are making tools, or the tools, even the efficacy of the tools which are existing, some of them free or paid, how efficient they actually are, and whether they meet the requirements of the researchers or not. So these are things which require contemplation, and that was exactly the aim of the e-conference today, so that we can exchange our ideas and share and leave a thought in the minds of our worthy students and the faculty members who have listened to us today. So my congratulations to the conveners for convening such an international e-conference, and also I would like to express my sincere thanks and gratitude to the learned speakers who have disseminated knowledge to all of us so that we have benefited truly from this. Dr. Aseem Chauhan, the Chancellor and Chairman of Amity University, Madhya Pradesh, and the additional President of RBEF, which is the funding body of all Amity institutions in India and abroad, sends his greetings to all of you and wishes you all the very best. He was supposed to be speaking on my behalf here now, but at the last moment, he had to rush for an international meeting, which is of great importance, to which he could not have avoided. So he has delegated that responsibility to me, and he conveys his special thanks to the speakers who have spared their valuable time, and he would certainly be meeting you some other time, virtually or physically. So on his behalf, please accept our gratitude and sincere thanks from Dr. Aseem Chauhan ji. So thank you very much for participating in this, for sharing your valuable knowledge, and wish you all the very best. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, sir, for your highly encouraging and stimulating remarks. Dear audience, there's one very important announcement. The link for the feedback has been shared in the chat box. You all are requested to fill the form. The certificates of participation would be auto-generated after you submit the form. This link would be active for 24 hours only. Talent and skills are the crops that are nurtured, groomed, and given all possible opportunities to grow and bloom. This one-day international e-conference on digital humanities in the 21st century, emerging trends and future prospects witnessed highly enriching and thought-provoking deliberations and paper presentations from academicians, scholars, and researchers from all across the country and the world. Now is the time to acknowledge and recognize the best paper presenter of the day. May I request Honorable Vice Chancellor to kindly announce the winner of the Best Paper Award. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. The Best Paper Award goes to Dr. Nidhi Sharma, Assistant Professor at Postgraduate Government College of Girls, Chandigarh. Congratulations, Dr. Nidhi Sharma. Yeah, you may proceed, please.
Thank you, sir, and congratulations to the winner of Best Paper Award. We have been listening to eminent speakers deliberating in the areas of digital humanities in 21st century, emerging trends and future prospects. All these valuable insights gave us a new perspective that one should adopt in order to thrive and sustain in today's world. Dr. Dibyaditi Roy, Assistant Professor, may I most respectfully request you, sir, to accept this token of gratitude.
Oh, thank you so much. That's lovely. Thank you.
We are also honored by the highly enriching lecture by Dr. Maya Dodd, Faculty, Flame University. On behalf of Amity University, Madhya Pradesh, we present a token of gratitude to her.
We will be sending this to your places also.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I thought it's a virtual award, but it turns out it's actually real.
At the moment it is virtual, but it will be given to you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. That sounds wonderful.
On behalf of Amity University, Madhya Pradesh and the organizing committee, we present a token of our love and gratitude to Dr. Nirmala Menon, Associate Professor, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Indore.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Gratitude is the fairest blossom which springs from the soul. Every celebration is an experience. The external fades away and the internal lingers and echoes in the depth of our hearts. As we come to the close of our valedictory session, I invite Professor Dr. Sumit Narula, Director, Amity School of Communication and Deputy Dean, Publication and Citation, to propose the formal vote of thanks. Please, sir.
On behalf of Dr. Iti ma'am, Director AISS, and myself, my personal behalf, I would like to thank the Honorable Chancellor Dr. Aseem Chauhan and our founding Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General V.K. Sharma sir, for giving us this opportunity to have this conference. And I'm also very thankful to our Pro VC, Dr. M.P. Kaushik sir, our Deputy Pro VC, Dr. Anil Vashisht, and Mr. Amanpreet Randhawa in the HR department, because we were sitting together, me, Aman, and Iti ma'am, when we decided to have this conference, and then we researched on it, and I was deeply engrossed by the work of the three eminent personalities, Nirmala ma'am, Dibyajit ma'am, and Maya Dodd ma'am. And then I decided to invite them, and thankfully they all agreed. So I'm very thankful to you all. And ma'am, about the open access, we have the open access journal. I met you in IIT Indore, and we decided to put that under the K-Ship project. So we will be continuing with that project in time soon. And we are very excited to be joining hands with Dharti, and we are very, very thankful to Dharti for giving up this platform and collaborating us at a short notice. And yes, we will also be giving you some of the work from our students and our research scholars in your upcoming conference in February. So we are very excited, and it is, I would say, we are very, very thankful to you for joining us. And I am also very thankful to the anchors, Deepti ma'am, Siddharth Sharma, my teammate, and the other people, those who are working with us tirelessly for this virtual conference. And special thanks to the IT team, to our Noida IT team, and as well as to our Noida Gwalior IT team, because internet is the thing now. If internet is gone, I think the conference could not have achieved that success. And last but not the least, the students, those who are sitting with us since 9:30 in the morning. Students, you are the backbone of the Indian education system. We miss you in the campus, and we are very, very excited to bring you back as and when this third wave of Corona goes out. And we are very excited to be in touch with the students, and things could have been more different had it been a physical conference. And we all invite you, Nirmala ma'am and Maya ma'am and Divya sir, to our campus physically, maybe this year at the end, or maybe next year, as and when everything materializes fine. Definitely you are invited into our campus. So thanks a lot again, everybody, for joining. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. On this note, we conclude the highly enriching, productive, fruitful, and a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend ahead. This is Tulsi Chauhan signing off.
Thank you, everybody. So IT team, you can close the session. Thank you.